Chapter 1074. Let's fight. The broken bowl in Tomiko's hand flew out as she got into a fighting stance. She was determined to die to repay the kindness of the 6th young master and the 5th Madame, Su Maner. Tomiko also threw the broken bowl in her hand. When she was in the Yang family academy, she did a lot of physical training. Although she didn't learn properly, she still had some strength. At this moment, she also had the idea of dying together with the enemy. She clenched her fists tightly. They're rebelling. Catch them. I want them to pay for all the torture. When the captain saw that the two women dared to clamor in front of him, he was furious. He had already decided to teach them a lesson. Even if the two of them died, he wouldn't let go of their corpses. The captain's eyes revealed a fierce look. All of this was seen by Tomiko and Tomiko. At the same time, they were also prepared to die. Not far away, only 2 of the 6 CIA operatives were left. One of them was seriously injured and looked like they were about to be wiped out. Tomiko, who had lost all hope, looked in the direction of Deming. At this moment, only Yang Qindong's handsome face flashed in her mind. Perhaps the only thing she did wrong was not staying by his side. Kill? Several Japanese Empire patrol soldiers took the lead. In order to prevent themselves from being taken advantage of, each of them even held a battle sword. They looked like they would really kill the 2 women if they didn't cooperate. With a shout, 2 Japanese Empire soldiers took the lead and rushed forward. 5 steps, 3 steps. They were getting closer and closer to Tomiko and Tomiko. The 2 women gritted their teeth and took a deep breath, preparing to meet the attack head-on. However, at this moment, the sound of air being pierced was heard again. Arrows were shot from afar and accurately hit the chests of the 2 Japanese Empire soldiers. The powerful force directly caused the 2 to scream and fall to the ground. The sudden change also stunned the other Japanese Empire soldiers. They didn't know what to do. Don't be afraid, we're here. With a shout, a tall and big King Kong appeared. Behind him and beside him were 30 Langya Special Forces members. In order not to attract attention, King Kong did not take a gun. Instead, he took a crossbow that was specially used by the Special Forces. This crossbow had a shooting range of 150 steps. At that time, it was already one of the most powerful cold weapons. The moment King Kong appeared, he fired the first arrow. The Special Forces members that he had brought with him also started firing their crossbows. For a moment, the sounds of arrows whizzing through the air could be heard incessantly. One after another, the patrolling soldiers of the Japanese Empire were shot and fell to the ground, dead. With the same number of people, the difference in combat power was like heaven and earth, bringing about different results. Retreat. Seeing the surrounding soldiers fall one by one, the patrol leader knew that things were not going well. He turned around and ran, wanting to go back and report. But just as he turned around, 2 arrows shot through his body at almost the same time, causing him to fall to the ground under the powerful inertia. With the captain dead, the rest of the soldiers were nothing to be afraid of. Just the arrows alone were enough to kill them. From the beginning to the end, the Langya Special Forces members did not have the slightest bit of close contact with the patrolling soldiers of the Japanese Empire. The outcome of the battle had been decided. In the blink of an eye, 30 patrolling soldiers were all dead. However, the remaining 2 members of the CIA operation team were safe and sound. This accurate archery shocked Junko. It also scared some of the brave citizens of the Japanese Empire who were watching the battle not far away. Captain, do you want to kill them all? Seeing that some of the citizens who were watching the battle had already screamed and fled in all directions, some of the team members were worried that they would go and report to the higher-ups. No need. King Kong shook his head indifferently. His mission was to rescue Princess Junko and Manager Yoshiko. Since his mission was completed, it was natural for him to retreat. As for whether or not someone would chase after him, he was not worried at all. In fact, he even had some desire. He had not used the gun behind him yet. He wanted to see if his body could withstand the hot bullets. Pack up. Everyone retreat. The streets soon returned to calm. After waiting for about a quarter of an hour, a large number of Japanese army appeared. When the captain of the infantry saw that 30 of his companions had been killed by the arrows, he made the right decision. Don't chase after them. I'm afraid that they have already run far away. It was not that they did not want to chase after them, but they could not chase after them at all. Otherwise, who knew if they would be able to come back alive? Weren't these 30 people lying on the ground without breathing a good example? Bomo City. It was close to the capital of the Japanese Empire, Ping in Beijing, which could be regarded as the southern gate of the country. In the back garden, the emperor and the empress as well as their son, were walking on the street of Bomo City. Oda Nagamasa was defeated and killed. as the mastermind behind the bombing of the general's office. This time when they returned to the palace of Ping in Beijing, they were afraid that they would be directly put under house arrest. Fortunately, he and his daughter escaped. Once Junko found the king of martial arts of the Daming South, she might be able to put pressure on Ashikaga Yoshimasa to improve her treatment. The emperor of the Japanese Empire actually entrusted all of his future to his daughter. This was a kind of irony for the emperor of the Japanese Empire, who was extremely patriarchal. He had already thought that the future was very bad. Even if it was his daughter, he just thought about it and did not have much hope. But he did not know that the reality was more cruel than he thought. A disaster was imminent. Empress Tengra was very beautiful. Whether the royal family had declined or not, after all, it was the face of the Japanese Empire. As the empress, it was necessary to be beautiful. Tengra was not only beautiful, but also had a kind of intellectual beauty. Sometimes she would show a soft and feminine look. Because of this, her beauty was coveted by many men. It was just that in the palace, there were so many people protecting her that no one had the courage to do anything to her. But now it was different. On the way to the palace, the protection was a little lax. Especially Yuki Kiyomasa, who was in charge of escorting the empress, drank a lot of sake that night. Although the alcohol content of that thing was very low, in the eyes of Wuxia people, it was not considered wine at all. But the most important thing was that Yuki Kiyomasa, who was a little confused, just happened to come to the room where Tengra was being held. Most of the houses in the Japanese Empire were made of paper. If one wanted to see what was inside, one only needed to gently poke at the window, and everything would be clear at a glance. And when he looked, he just happened to see Tengra, who had just taken a bath and was wearing clothes. Although the time was a little late, sometimes the more hazy the feeling, the more it would arouse people's infinite imagination and even lead to crimes. Just as Yuki Kiyomasa's mind was in a confused state, after looking, he didn't know where he got the strength to push the door open and enter. The door opened from the outside and Tengra, who was only half-dressed, turned around in a panic. She saw Yuki Kiyomasa, whose eyes were red and had a lewd smile on his face, striding towards her. "Ah, what are you doing? Someone come quickly." Out of a woman's intuition, Tengra knew what was going to happen next and couldn't help but shout in panic. Unfortunately, this was not the palace and there were maids everywhere. This was only a temporary resting place, and all the maids who had followed her out before had all run away. Otherwise, there wouldn't be no one waiting outside the door when the empress was taking a bath. With her shouting, naturally, no maids or servants came to protect the empress. Unfortunately, Prince Ren, who was only 15 years old, came out to relieve himself and heard it. Although Prince Ren was indeed one of the most tragic emperors in the history of the Japanese Empire, he didn't lose his courage when he was young. After hearing his mother's shout, he hurriedly ran over, and saw Yuki Kiyomasa hugging his mother and biting her. No matter what, he was still a prince, the future emperor, and the one who was being bullied was his own mother. How could Prince Ren let it go? After shouting, he rushed over and wanted to kick Yuki Kiyomasa, who was already somewhat unconscious, away. Since young, Prince Ren didn't train much and didn't do any physical work, so he didn't have much strength. The tearing didn't injure Yuki Kiyomasa, and only tore off a piece of his clothes. Tengra took this opportunity to scratch his face, causing blood to flow out. The alcohol, the stimulation of blood, and the restless feeling in his body caused Yuki Kiyomasa to temporarily lose his mind. Someone actually wanted to disturb him. In a fit of anger, he unsheathed the saber at his waist and abruptly slashed behind him. The poor and unprepared Prince Ren was slashed in the neck, and blood splattered everywhere. With a pair of eyes wide open in disbelief, Prince Ren fell to the ground with a plop. After a few tremors, he stopped breathing. His life ended like this, and he didn't have to live the rest of his life like a coward. He didn't know if it was a good or bad thing for him. After killing someone, Yuki Kiyomasa's mind became much clearer. Especially when he saw that the person he killed was the successor of the emperor, Prince Ren, he finally knew how big of a mistake he had made, and his whole body trembled. Her son died in front of her, and as a mother, Tengra went crazy on the spot. She pounced on Yuki Kiyomasa, wanting to avenge her son. She wanted to kill the murderer who destroyed her hope in life. Several scratches appeared on his face. At first, Yuki Kiyomasa tried to avoid them because of her identity, but after a long time he was a little annoyed, and in anger he stabbed forward with his sword. He originally wanted to scare this woman, but he didn't expect that Tengra would rush over when he stabbed her, and then. There was no then. After Prince Ren died, there was another corpse in the room. Ha 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 ha. After a while, Yuki Kiyomasa looked up to the sky and laughed. He didn't expect that he would kill the empress and a prince just because he drank a little too much. Presumably, if this matter was spread out, he would definitely be punished severely. It was even possible that his family would be exterminated. Chapter 1075. Since this was the case, he might as well go all the way and kill them all. At this moment, Kazaki Kumi rushed to the place where the emperor rested. He only wanted to eliminate the root of the problem. Perhaps this was the only way for him to survive. Then, the Queen of Heaven died, Prince Rin died, and the emperor also died. They all died under Kazaki Kumi's blade. Then he called his soldiers to disguise the bodies of the three people. After the traces of a fight were left on the scene, the sky was already bright. Kazaki Kumi carefully thought about his words. After there were no loopholes, he wrote an urgent memorial and sent it to General Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who was commanding the battle on the battlefield. Of course, Kazaki Kumi would not admit that these three people were killed by him. He only said that someone wanted to kidnap them at night, and he led his soldiers to fight a hard battle. In the end, the people who rescued them escaped, but in the chaos, the emperor's family of three was killed. This big event, as the only relative of the three people who died, Princess Junko didn't know about it. After being rescued by King Kong and other members of the Wolf Fang Special Forces, they rushed all the way to Changmen Prefecture. Along the way they encountered several enemy encirclements, and one of them was a ninja team, but under the protection of King Kong and others, they all passed through safely. Half a month later they finally broke through the layers of obstacles and came to Changmen Prefecture. They came to the front gate of the 5-star Army's barracks. Let's go to see the 6th young master. After Tomiko saw the 5-star Army's flag hanging high in the barracks, the long-time pressure finally completely relaxed at this moment, and then she proposed her idea to Tomiko. Can I wash first? Tomiko didn't immediately agree but said shyly. Tomiko noticed that Tomiko's face was dirty. How could she let the 6th young master see this? She immediately smiled and said, "Of course. I will have to trouble Captain King Kong. Follow me." King Kong nodded solemnly and led the two of them to the barracks. In the main tent, Yang Chendong already knew that Junko had returned safely, but there was no smile on his face. Because of the news that the Japanese Empire's emperor and his family of three had been killed, Yesen was brought back by Tai Hu, the leader of the Langya Special Forces. When King Kong was sent to Zhongda City to rescue Junko, Tai Hu was also ordered to go to Ping and Beijing to rescue the emperor of the Japanese Empire. Yang Chendong had already made arrangements for the future of the emperor's family, which was to leave the Japanese Empire and go to a place where no one knew their identity to enjoy the rest of their lives. In the end, Yang Chendong still couldn't bear to make the decision to kill them. However, he also wouldn't allow some people to interfere with his matters. The final decision was to get the emperor's family out of here. But the plan couldn't keep up with the changes. When Tai Hu and the others rushed all the way to the Bomo area, they had already received the news that the emperor's family of three had been killed. Tai Hu didn't believe it but carried out an investigation. They caught one of the 9 demon soldiers who was responsible for cleaning up the battlefield, and then learned the whole story. Everything that happened was somewhat beyond Yang Chendong's expectation. But overall it was a good thing because it relieved some of Yang Chendong's worries, and gave him the most honorable reason to send troops to the Japanese Empire. But Junko came back. How could he explain all this to her? But Yoshiko came back with her. Yang Chendong finally decided to leave the matter to others. He really didn't want to see Junko's sad face. Send someone to call Yoshiko, I have something to say to her. King Kong's ability was not bad. Even in the wartime military camp, he still found a bathtub and asked someone to boil enough hot water. Junko was able to wash herself from head to toe, and then changed into the new clothes that had been prepared for her. Then Yoshiko came, and as soon as she appeared, her eyes were red. Obviously she had cried. Speaking of which, when she was in the palace of Ping in Beijing, the emperor's family was also good to her, so she had some feelings for them. Junko. Seeing Princess Junko, who had just bathed and revealed her peerless face, Yoshiko's eyes were red again, and tears flowed out uncontrollably. After a while, there was another heart-wrenching cry from the big tent. The sky was dotted with stars, and after a day of fighting, everything returned to calm. Junko was also calm, and she was accompanied by Yoshiko walking out of a big tent. Just now she saw the soldier of the 9 demons who used to be a guard in the palace, so Junko knew him. From the mouth of this person, Junko knew the whole story, but she had already cried for an afternoon, and her tears had dried up, so she didn't cry anymore. After coming out of the big tent, the silence was somewhat frightening. "Where is Sensei's tent? Please take me there." Looking at Captain King Kong accompanying her, Junko asked. In the main tent, Yang Qindong was still looking at the sand table in front of him, thinking about the next military plan. There was a sound of footsteps outside the door and Beta Persei came in. "Young master, Princess Junko is here and she wants to see you." Yang Qindong did not answer immediately. He first let out a sigh. He knew that what should come would eventually come. "Well, bring her in. No one else is allowed to enter without orders." "Yes." Beta Persei agreed and stepped back. Junko, who looked a little haggard, then walked into the big tent. The main tent was lit with candles, and when the candles reflected on people's faces, it could show the most beautiful side. It was like looking at a beauty under the moon, and the more you looked, the more beautiful she became. Especially at this moment, Junko's eyes were filled with tears, which gave people a delicate feeling. "Sensei." "Junko." At this moment, their eyes focused together. Perhaps it was because he hadn't touched a woman since the war, or perhaps it was because of Junko's influence in his heart, but at this moment when Yang Qindong looked at Junko, he had a different feeling. Especially when their eyes were intertwined. At first glance, she was like a pear blossom with spring rain. At first glance, she was like west shining water by 3 points. At first glance, she was more like a beauty that shamed the moon. At first glance, Sensei. Junko threw herself into Yang Qindong's arms, and tears flowed out uncontrollably. "Sensei, Junko has no relatives, Junko is very pitiful." "Junko, don't worry, I will be your family from now on." Yang Qindong said, lowered his head and wanted to wipe the tears on Junko's face. But what greeted him was warm lips, and Junko took the initiative to lean over. Junko, who had just found her family, found a sense of security, and was no longer tied down by her family. Her heart was at its softest, and at this moment she decided to let go of herself and not suppress her feelings for Yang Qindong. In the face of a beauty taking the initiative to throw herself into his arms, Yang Qindong had no intention to refuse. Although he was taking advantage of her, if he refused, he was afraid that it would only hurt Junko's heart. At this moment he increased the strength in his hands and after a while he picked Junko up by the waist and walked straight to the big bed in the inner room of the main tent. Thunder stirred up the earth fire. Outside the main tent, Beta Persei signaled with his eyes, and all the long way retreated 20 meters, clearing the entire tent. After a night of spring rain, Yang Qindong got up from the bed energetically. He didn't disturb Junko, who was sleeping. Fleeing all the way and then hearing the news of the death of her parents and brother, she had suffered too much and should have a good rest. He took the initiative to walk out of the tent and receive the generals outside. First, he met with the commander of the 1st Division, 2nd Division, and 3rd Division. After listening to today's battle plan, he approved it. After watching the 3 division commanders leave, Yang Qindong waved to Division Commander Tian Hu, Commander Su He, and Division Commander Su Ku of the 1st Reserve Division. "Come here and discuss the next step of the battle plan." "6th Young Master, are we finally ready to fight?" Hearing Yang Qindong's call, the 3 generals were excited. "Yes." Yang Qindong nodded. After 20 days of stalemate, both sides had suffered losses. The original 60,000 soldiers of the Alien Alliance had been replenished twice in a row. If one counted carefully, nearly 20,000 people died in the battle, and countless people were injured. Of course, the Japanese Empire on the other side was not much better, and their losses would only be greater. But even so, Yang Qindong didn't intend to send out the elite force. First, he still needed to continue to confuse the other side and make them underestimate the enemy. Second, this time they didn't have a proper reason to send out the troops. The intelligence agency at the front sent news that the Japanese Empire's people were very resistant to the appearance of the 5-star army. So, there were a lot of young people from the Japanese Empire who had signed up to join the army. Ashikaga Yoshimasa also took the opportunity to recruit more soldiers. If this continued, unless they used firearms and razed the entire island to the ground, it would be extremely difficult to occupy this place. Now Junko had come. She was the princess of the Japanese Empire and the only remaining member of the Japanese Empire's royal family. Her appearance could naturally mean a lot of things. It could also help the 5-star army turn from an invading army into a righteous army. Once there was enough righteousness to support it, it would naturally be time to launch an all-out counterattack. Yang Qindong called a commander and 2 division commanders to talk about the next war plan. He wanted to make all the preparations in advance. Late in the morning, Junko slowly opened her eyes. Separated by the main tent, there was no dazzling sunlight in the room, making people feel very comfortable. As soon as Junko opened her eyes, Tomiko appeared in front of her. Not only her, but there were also 6 maids standing on the side. These were the maids who came to serve Junko. From this moment on, Junko had officially become Yang Qindong's woman. If she wanted, she could quickly become the 8th wife. Chapter 1076. Princess, you're awake. Tomiko looked at Junko, who still had doubts in her eyes, and smiled gently. Then she began to order people to help Junko dress up. During this process, Tomiko told Junko that Yang Qindong wanted to take her as a concubine. As a princess of the Japanese Empire, marrying someone as a concubine was a disgrace to her status. However, looking at Yang Xie's current power, Junko was the one who benefited. Especially now that the Japanese Empire's royal family had already declined, this was a great blessing for Junko. Despite knowing this, Junko still didn't agree immediately. Instead, she said that she wanted to see Yang Qindong first before making a decision. Not long after, everyone else in the main tent went out. Yang Qindong was also invited back to meet Junko in the main tent. After a night, there seemed to be a gap between the two. Junko didn't take the initiative to throw herself into his arms. Instead, she stared at Yang Qindong with a thoughtful look. In response, Yang Qindong sat down leisurely. He took a sip of the tea in front of him and let Junko look at him from head to toe. After a long time, Junko finally spoke. "Sensei, why did you bring the army to the Japanese Empire this time?" "To save you." Yang Qindong answered in a very capable manner without the slightest hesitation. Obviously, he already knew what Junko wanted to ask. This answer made Junko feel a little touched. However, thinking of her own doubts, she didn't express anything. Instead, she continued to ask, "Sensei, now that my father, mother, and brother are all dead, the internal strife in the Japanese Empire is about to be quelled. If I ask you to withdraw the army now, will you do so?" "Yes." Yang Qindong still said without any hesitation. His answer was so straightforward that it made Junko feel like she couldn't believe it. Although this was indeed what she wanted to hear, she still suppressed her joy and said, "All right then, teacher, please give the order to retreat." "Okay." Yang Qindong stood up and strode out of the tent. From the moment he came in to the moment he left, he had only said 4 words, but it had already broken through all the defenses in Junko's heart. At this moment, she finally stopped being reserved and took the initiative to run behind Yang Qindong and hugged him. "Teacher, everything is just Junko's test. Please don't blame me and don't withdraw the army." "Huh?" Yang Qindong pretended to be confused, but in his heart, he already had a card up his sleeve. He turned around, looked at Junko and said, "If the 5-star army doesn't retreat with our strength, it won't be long before the Japanese Empire becomes one of Yang Xie's subordinate provinces. Don't you understand this logic?" "I understand." "Then why are you still?" Yang Qindong pretended to be confused and said, "Junko also understands that the Japanese Empire has nothing to do with me anymore. It abandoned us first, abandoned the entire royal family. In order to prove their mistake, the Japanese Empire must be destroyed. This is the price they have to pay for killing my parents and brother. Teacher, you will definitely help you get revenge, right?" Junko looked at Yang Qindong with a hopeful face, waiting for his answer. "No." Unexpectedly, Yang Qindong shook his head decisively. "This time we mobilize the army for your safety. Now that you are fine, the 5-star army has to retreat. We are not an invader, we are the army of justice. Before this, the Japanese Empire didn't provoke us, so..." At first, when Yang Qindong said that they could retreat, Junko was still a little doubtful. But now what he said made her even more determined. She finally knew that the 5-star army didn't have any intention of attacking the Japanese Empire. They really only wanted to save her. At this moment, Junko's heart was moved. At the same time, she was even more determined to avenge her parents. She even wanted to slap all the people in power in the Japanese Empire and let them know the consequences of abandoning the royal family. In order to let Yang Qindong do something, Junko took the initiative and said, "I am willing to be your 8th wife. If someone bullied your wife's family and cruelly killed them, can you avenge her?" "This, Junko looked at Yang Qindong, who was still hesitating. She gently pulled his arm like a spoiled child. "This is something that should be done," Yang Qindong said with a helpless look. After saying this, Yang Qindong felt a little guilty. He also knew that this matter couldn't be hidden from the smart Junko for long. He was afraid that she had already noticed something, but presumably no one would ever mention this topic again. "Thank you, Sensei. Then please send the troops. When the time comes, I will denounce Ashikaga Yoshimasa in the name of the royal family's princess. I will let the people of the Japanese Empire know who harmed the royal family, who started the civil war, and who wants to overthrow the Japanese Empire. The more Junko said, the more determined her expression became. Just from this point alone, she had already made up her mind. Seeing another country send troops to destroy her own country, and it was because of her own request, no one would be in a good mood. But Junko didn't feel any unhappiness at this moment. On the contrary, her heart was filled with hatred, and she longed for the happiness that victory would bring her. Since this country had abandoned his imperial father and imperial mother, then let it perish. I promise you. Yang Qindong was waiting for this result to appear. It seemed that she was just a woman. She couldn't mount a horse to wield a sword, nor could she kill the enemy. But she was the princess of the Japanese Empire, the last remaining member of the Japanese Empire's royal family. The situation was completely different. With Junko's support, Yang Qindong had a righteous cause, and he had a good reason to send troops. What's more, the original Japanese Empire wasn't united. The Supreme General Ashikaga Yoshimasa seemed to have a monopoly on power, but there were still many hidden opponents. It was just that they were too scattered and couldn't form a united force. In the past, the Emperor of the Back Garden was unable to integrate this power together, but Yang Qindong did have such strength. Because he had the strength to compete with Ashikaga Yoshimasa, and was even stronger than him. In other people's eyes, this was a big tree, a tree that was far more luxuriant than the Supreme General. Junko's heart was filled with hatred, and with Yang Qindong's support, she quickly wrote a document to announce to the world. First, she described in detail the cause of her father, mother, and brother's death. Then she pointed at Ashikaga Yoshimasa and said that this villain wanted to overthrow the power of the royal family and bring a disaster to the entire Japanese Empire. Finally, she called on all the heroes of the Japanese Empire to work together to deal with Ashikaga Yoshimasa and restore the Japanese Empire to its former glory. This document was read and approved by Yang Qindong, and it was sent out. It appeared in various cities of the Japanese Empire through the intelligence network, causing a huge response and influence. Hokuriku, one of the 7 provinces of the Japanese Empire. As one of the most important regions of the Japanese Empire, it was under the jurisdiction of General Hirai. Hirai, whose full name was Flatwell Field, was one of the more trusted and important ministers of the Backyard Emperor. When he was in the imperial court, he caused a lot of trouble for Ashikaga Yoshimasa, so much so that the latter spent a lot of effort to get rid of him. In order to achieve his goal, he even handed Hokuriku over to him. According to Ashikaga Yoshimasa's plan, once Flatwell Field left the palace and the Emperor of the Backyard, he could kill him at any time. Not only would he solve his worries, but he would also be able to vent his anger. However, Flatwell Field was much more powerful than he had imagined. After leaving Ping in Beijing, he disappeared. When he reappeared, he was already in Ekizan Prefecture of Hokuriku and had taken control of part of the military power there. This result made Ashikaga Yoshimasa furious. Just as he was about to send troops to deal with him, the bombing of the general's residence happened. He had no choice but to shift his attention to dealing with Oda Nagamasa and the imperial family. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Flatwell Field went all out and integrated the power of the entire Hokuriku. He was ready to cooperate with Oda Nagamasa and help the imperial family regain all their power. However, everything changed a little too quickly. Flatwell Field had just finished the integration work when news of Oda Nagamasa's defeat and the death of the imperial family came from the front lines. When he first heard the news, Flatwell Field couldn't believe it. When he found out that it was true and not fake news deliberately spread by someone, he couldn't stop crying. He found that he suddenly had no goal, no target or object to be loyal to. Flatwell Field was a very thoughtful and capable person. Usually, such a person would be able to see the most crucial point in a chaotic situation and make the right choice. It was because of this ability that he couldn't stop crying. In his eyes, without the imperial family, there was no one in the Japanese Empire who could suppress General Ashikaga Yoshimasa. Because he was a smart person and could see this, he felt that there was no hope ahead. He could even see that after eliminating the imperial family, Ashikaga Yoshimasa's next target would be him. Without the support of the imperial family, Flatwell Field knew that there was no way he could reach the heights of the general with his own ability. Even if he couldn't win, the only way left was to escape. Fortunately, he had led his troops to conquer Noden Prefecture. Behind it was the vast ocean, which was his escape route. Flatwell Field withdrew his troops and stockpiled food and money. He was ready to retreat at any time. It was at this time that the letter written by Junko announced to the world that the last member of the royal family, the last hope, spoke in her unique voice. When Junko's letter suddenly appeared on the street after one night, Flat Wellfield, who was ready to retreat, saw hope again. After shouting "God has eyes" in his mansion, he gathered all his important subordinates. He decided to cooperate with Junko to deal a heavy blow to Ashikaga Yoshimasa. As long as there was a way to survive, no one would choose to leave their home. As long as there was a little hope of victory, everyone would want to fight. Flat Wellfield was such a person. Chapter 1077. In the entire Japanese Empire, Flat Wellfield wasn't the only one. Some of them were targeted by Ashikaga Yoshimasa and could be retaliated against at any time. Some didn't like the Supreme General and would look for an opportunity to stab him in the back. Some had the same ambition and knew that only by eliminating Ashikaga Yoshimasa would they have a chance to succeed. No matter what kind of thoughts they had, Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who was too powerful, had obviously become the target of many people's hidden attacks. Especially when Princess Junko's document was released, it gave these people a suitable excuse. Soon, the anti-Supreme General's forces began to appear everywhere, and the situation took a major turn. Flat Wellfield of Hokuriku was the first to respond. Under the leadership of Princess Junko, he gathered 80,000 troops in Ekizan Prefecture and acted as if they were going to attack Ashikaga Yoshimasa's lair from Ping and Beijing. Everything was afraid of someone taking the lead. Flat Wellfield's actions quickly received responses from everywhere. For a time, the Japanese Empire was filled with anti-Supreme General voices. The people of the Japanese Empire were also confused because of all these voices. Originally, the Supreme General's name was very well known in the hearts of the people. In addition, the Emperor of the Backyard, who was threatened, had publicly said more than once that the Japanese Empire was where it was today because of the Supreme General. This caused some people who didn't know the truth to believe in Ashikaga Yoshimasa. This was also the reason why when the five-star army suddenly appeared, Ashikaga Yoshimasa raised his arms and called for enlistment in the name of the Supreme General. That was because everyone believed in him. But now, with the uproar in various places, especially those who were unfavorable to Ashikaga Yoshimasa, most of the people began to wait and see. What? The 100,000 new soldiers that Takedo prepared aren't coming? Ashikaga Yoshimasa angrily looked at General Maori Masanori, who was reporting the situation to him, in the temporary residence of Yasunori district. The Maori regularization, who was not tall and had small eyes, was being reprimanded with his head lowered. He knew that he would be scolded this time, but he still came. Since some things had changed, he had to report it to the general in advance so that he could make countermeasures. Yes, General. It's not just the 100,000 new soldiers from Donghai province who are not coming. The new armies from other regions are also facing some problems. Waka. Ashikaga Yoshimasa cursed angrily and slammed his palm on the desk in front of him. His eyes were burning with anger. Of course, he knew why such a problem had occurred. It was all because of the document Princess Junko had announced to the world. To be honest, he didn't think much of this woman at first. Even when Kiyoshi reported that someone wanted to save the emperor and was killed by him, he wasn't angry. Instead, he was a little happy. For a long time, the royal family had been a huge dark cloud over his head. Although he tried his best to weaken the influence and sense of existence of the other party, it had to be said that more people still recognized the royal family. Many forces that opposed him often used the royal family's name to suppress him. Finally, they were all dead. Although from the information he received, it was very likely that it was done by his subordinate Kiyoshi in private, this matter was not directed by him. Wasn't this the will of the heavens? Did the heavens want the royal family to die? Did the heavens want to give him, the general, a chance to rise? Without the existence of the royal family, Ashikaga Yoshimasa was ready to ascend the throne. As for whether there would be opposition forces, so what? He would fight and win them over. He often used such methods, and the reason why he was able to reach his current position was because of this set of methods that had made a miraculous contribution. He was even more convinced that any schemes, tricks, and the actions of villains were not worth mentioning in front of absolute strength. As for the sudden appearance of the 150,000 five-star army, Ashikaga Yoshimasa didn't pay much attention to them. After fighting for these days, he believed that he had grasped the strength of the other party. They were only a little stronger than the ordinary army of the Japanese Empire, but their number was still small, so there was no need to worry. Originally, the situation was good. As long as he could force the five-star army to retreat, he could withdraw and deal with the forces that opposed him. Finally, he could destroy them one by one and achieve his goal of becoming the emperor. But all of this was completely changed because of the appearance of Junko. Ashikaga Yoshimasa was just a woman. Even if she was reborn in the back garden, he wouldn't have the slightest fear. But the most amazing thing was that Junko's announcement made the 5-star army and the forces in the country who opposed him have a common language and can walk together. As a result, he became a rat crossing the street and everyone wanted to beat him up. According to the Maori regularization, the people who opposed him were gradually gathering. Once these people really gathered together, even if he was the general, it would be difficult for him to gain any advantage. It was even possible that he would be defeated and killed. Let Nishi Toshihide negotiate with the great southern martial king. We can give them some benefits. After solving the domestic problem, it won't be too late to deal with them. Ashikaga Yoshimasa was a person who stood at the top for many years, so he quickly made the right decision. Nishi Toshihide was born in an aristocratic family. He was very famous in the Japanese Empire for being eloquent. This person was not only knowledgeable, but also learned martial arts from an early age. He was one of the talents that Ashikaga Yoshimasa relied on the most. After receiving the order, he set off from Anyun Prefecture to Nagato Prefecture, and sent his name to the 5-star army's camp first. This person is very cunning and agile. He is good at both civil and martial arts. He is an important helper of Ashikaga Yoshimasa. After reading the name, Junko told everything she knew to her husband, Yang Qindong. After returning to China for 2 years, Junko had a more detailed understanding of the situation in the Japanese Empire. With her identity plus the importance that the emperor attached to her, it was not difficult to know some secrets. With this feature, she became one of Yang Qindong's strategists to attack the Japanese Empire. Oh, so powerful? Yang Qindong asked with interest. Yes, King, I suggest that you kill this person. Junko's eyes were firm. Since she was with Yang Qindong, she also changed the way she addressed him. She used to call him teacher, but now she called him king. It represented a kind of maturity and progress. With this relationship, she was confident that she could take the opportunity to kill Nishi Toshihide. It could be considered as collecting a little interest for the death of her father and mother. As the saying goes, the greater the hope, the greater the disappointment. This time, Junko was destined to be disappointed, because Yang Qindong did not listen to her suggestion. Instead, he shook his head and said, "How can I break this rule and let others laugh at me?" Yang Qindong did things based on his heart. Sometimes, in order to achieve his goals, it was inevitable that he would use some underhanded means. For a person like him, the saying of not killing the messenger in a war had nothing to do with him, but he still used this as a reason to say it. This only proved that he didn't want to take Ningshi Duishio's life yet. Since Junko's letter was announced to the world, the situation in the Japanese Empire had undergone a major change. This change was, of course, what Yang Qindong wanted to see, but it was still too far away from the final victory. What Yang Qindong wanted was not to surrender, but to destroy. What Yang Qindong wanted was not for everyone to surrender to the Japanese Empire's royal family and Princess Junko, but for them to surrender to him, to submit to the 5-star army, and to submit to the Han Dynasty. In order to achieve this goal, he needed to severely damage the local army of the Japanese Empire. Before the final goal was achieved, he didn't want to see any side win. What he wanted was for Ashikaga Yoshimasa to fight with the other forces, and for both sides to suffer. In order to achieve this goal, a talent like Nishi Toshihide had to display his strength. How could he let him die so easily in front of him? Junko naturally didn't know about Yang Qindong's thoughts. She thought that this was the honest side of her husband, so she immediately expressed her admiration and said, "My king, are you really going to negotiate with them? The war has already reached this point and they killed your parents and brother. How can we negotiate?" Yang Qindong chuckled, then said to Beta Persei behind him, "Go, inform them that after Nishi Toshihide enters our camp, everything will be carried out according to the first plan." Junko didn't know what the first plan was, but soon on the third day, Nishi Toshihide came to the big tent of the 5-star army. After seeing Yang Qindong and Junko, the result was quickly announced to the world. Nishi Toshihide came. Compared to the average people of the Japanese Empire, he was 1.75 meters tall, which was not short at that time. His facial features were regular, he had thick eyebrows and big eyes, and he spoke very humbly and warmly, giving people a good first impression. "Please." Yang Qindong smiled and sat opposite Nishi Toshihide with Junko. Tomiko was responsible for serving the brewed tea. Tomiko, who was originally the CIA's supervisor in the Japanese Empire, has now become the person Junko trusts the most. After reporting to the CIA, the fifth Madame Su Maner gave her to Junko and became her personal maid. Thank you. Ning Shiduoxiu spoke in a somewhat awkward but still understandable Chinese. After she finished speaking, she suddenly lowered her head, fully displaying her humble side. Haha, I didn't expect Nishi Toshihide to also know Chinese. That will eliminate the language barrier. Come, try the tea of my huaxia. This is a good tea before the Ming Dynasty. Yang Qindong had a smile on his face, looking harmless to humans and animals. The meeting between the two sides was carried out in such a peaceful atmosphere. During the meeting, Nishi Toshihide observed Yang Qindong more than once. No matter how he looked at it, he couldn't connect the person who destroyed many countries and forces in the southern barbarian land of the Great Ming Dynasty with the young man in front of him. Chapter 1078. Although Ningxi Daxiu was familiar with some Chinese, he probably didn't know that there was an old saying in Huaxia, keep your strength hidden. There was even a less elegant saying among the people, a dog that bites doesn't bark. Just as the two sides were negotiating, the five-star army had already implemented the first set of plans and was in the process of implementing them. To Yang Qindong, there really wasn't much to talk about with the Japanese Empire. Thinking about the various things that would happen in the future, in order to prevent the painful scenes of the people of Huaxia from happening again, he felt that it was necessary for him to resolve some problems in advance. In the large tent, the tea drinking continued. It seemed that both sides had no intention of immediately entering into negotiations. Of course, Ningxi Daxi took the initiative to bring it up a few times, but it was all resolved by Yang Qindong. It was as if they were really reminiscing about the past, even though there was nothing to talk about. Outside the large tent, or rather outside the main tent, the world's 1st Cavalry Division, the Grasslands New Army, and the 1st Reserve Division had all set out, charging straight towards the Japanese Empire's army. The competition between the two sides had been going on for a long time. Both sides had suffered casualties and both sides had won and lost. This was the most realistic way to describe it. After a long period of fighting, the Japanese army had already gotten used to the five-star army's fighting style and combat strength. Ningxi Daxiu had already gone to the five-star army's main camp to begin negotiations. Some of the more optimistic people even thought that the war would end soon. How would the Japanese army know that the ones who had fought with them before were just some foreign allied forces that had just entered the battlefield? Their combat strength couldn't be said to be the weakest of the five-star army, but there was still a large gap between them and the strongest. The reason why they had chosen to fight to the death with the Japanese army was to deplete the number of foreign men, and also to train the soldiers. Of course, the most important point was to show the enemy that they were weak. Now, it seemed that their goals had been achieved. Once there was an outstanding seedling in the foreign allied forces, they would quickly be selected by the 1st Reserve Division. This rhythm of selecting elite soldiers and sending inferior soldiers to their deaths caused the 3 foreign allied forces to suffer heavy losses. It also allowed the 1st Reserve Division to expand from the original 20,000 to 30,000 people. These 30,000 people were veterans who had experienced the baptism of war. They were veterans who had climbed out of piles of corpses. Their strength could be imagined. But they weren't the strongest. The 1st Cavalry Division was the trump card of the five-star army. They were in existence was comparable to the Cold Vanguard Army, and even better in this kind of battle. The trump cards trumps army's side. As a daimyo, Tanaka had 50,000 soldiers in his hands. Under the orders of General Ashikaga Yoshimasa, he was responsible for the left wing of the 1st and 2nd lines of defense in Nagato Prefecture. He and another daimyo named Kazumi became the 2 gatekeepers, blocking the advance of the five-star army. With the support of the general, although the 2 daimyo suffered heavy losses in the battle against the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd divisions, the soldiers were quickly recovered, and the military system was perfected, which made them very satisfied. It wasn't like he would be the one to die. This kind of hard work could still be seen by the Grand General. Once the war was over, he would definitely be rewarded for his contributions. That would be the time when he would be promoted to the position of a general. Thinking that once he became a general, he would be second only to Ashikaga Yoshimasa. No matter what Kazumi thought, Tanaka was really happy. In particular, Nishi Daxiu also went to the five-star army's camp to negotiate, which was tantamount to the war coming to an end. Seeing that the overall situation was settled, his mood was even better. When people were in a good mood, they would naturally infect others. Just last night, Tanaka gathered the 2 chiefs, several county magistrates, and generals under him to drink until they were drunk. The war had been going on for more than a month and everyone's spirits were too tense. It was time to relax. In Tanaka's eyes, since Nishidaxyu was sent to negotiate and the five-star army agreed, it at least proved that the war would not happen again in a short time, and they could relax. This was a conventional way of thinking and there was nothing wrong with it. But if people fully understood Yang Qindong's habits, they would find that this was not a person who played according to common sense at all. Often the rules that everyone thought were the rules, he simply turned a blind eye to them. Otherwise he wouldn't have expanded the Yangxia army to such a scale in just a few years. In the early morning, Tanaka and his generals were still sleeping in the big tent, and the tent was full of the smell of alcohol. It could be seen that they really drank a lot last night. In addition, they found some military geisha to adjust the atmosphere and it was quite successful. Those who could drink half a caddy drank half a caddy, those who could drink half a caddy drank half a caddy, those who could drink half a caddy drank nearly 2 caddies, and they all fell to the ground. In the big tent, the sound of snoring, teeth grinding and sleep-talking came one after another. Compared to the so-called relaxation of the Japanese army's higher-ups, the soldiers below also became a lot more relaxed because there was no leader to manage them. In the morning, the soldiers didn't get up to exercise, but sat together in groups of 3 or 5 to chat. If the leaders needed to relax, why wouldn't they? Everyone was enjoying this short period of peace during the war. There were even some soldiers who, because they were too tired from the continuous fighting, went back to sleep after waking up in the morning to check that the army was fine. This was called, subordinates follow the example of their superiors. Without anyone to manage them, the soldiers were like a mass of loose sand. They each took care of their own things and once something happened they would only fight for themselves. 6 miles away from the Japanese Empire's camp, the 1st Heavenly Cavalry Division was quickly gathering. On the other side 5 miles away, the new army was also gathering, and they were all preparing for the upcoming battle. Commander, there are still half a quarter of an hour before the 6th young master's scheduled attack time. The 1st Regiment Commander, Taimur, walked to Tianhu's side and reported softly, the new army should also be ready to attack. I heard that they are very excited and are preparing to fight a good battle to steal the limelight of our 1st Heavenly Cavalry Division. Tianhu didn't take Taimur's words to heart. Instead, he said something very proud, how can the limelight of our 1st Cavalry Division be suppressed by others? Seeing how confident his commander was, Taimur laughed. Strictly speaking, Taimur had joined the 5-star army earlier than Tianhu. When he was fighting on horseback, Tianhu was still a good student in the Yang Family Academy. However, he wasn't unhappy that he was able to become a regiment commander under Tianhu's command. It was all because he was convinced. Whether it was horseback riding, control of the battlefield, or commanding an army, Taimur didn't think that he was better than Tianhu. For example, some of the orders given by the higher-ups. Why didn't they attack in the middle of the night or at daybreak? Why did it have to be at daybreak when the enemy should have woken up before attacking? What was the reason for all of this? Why did the 6th young master give such an order? To be honest, Taimur didn't understand. If he was the commander of a regiment he would definitely ask why. However, Tianhu didn't. The one who sent the order was Beta Persei. He only said that it was the 6th young master's order and Tianhu carried it out unconditionally. He was at the scene when this happened. Just based on this calmness, it wasn't something he could compare to. Tianhu was indeed smart. This had to do with his background as a student of the Yang Family Academy. Because he learned from Yang Qindong, he could understand more of Yang Qindong's intentions in many matters. For example, he had his own unique views on the timing of the attack this time. In his opinion, this should be Yang Qindong's intention to defeat the enemy fair and square. Through this battle, he could show the elite and powerful side of the 5-star army and achieve the purpose of intimidating the enemy. Of course, there was another advantage to fighting during the day. It would be easier to capture more captives. After all, vision was not good in the dark and it was too chaotic. It was very easy for deserters to escape. This idea was indeed correct. Yang Qindong did have such an idea. He wanted to defeat the Japanese army in broad daylight on the battlefield and use this to build the 5-star army. Once the elites were deployed, they would be invincible in the world. When the defeated Japanese army saw this scene with their own eyes, word of mouth spread. Presumably, when the name of the 5-star army was mentioned in the future, everyone would tremble from the bottom of their souls. If he wanted to achieve his goal, it was impossible to do it in the dark. The light was not good and it was impossible to see what was happening. It was also impossible to do it when it was just dawn. Most people were still in a confused state and could not make a clear judgment. However, it was different after daybreak. Everyone was up and could make a clear judgment. As for whether this would bring some pressure to the 1st Cavalry Division and the new army, Yang Qindong really did not think that it would be a problem. Needless to say, the 1st Cavalry Division was invincible. It was not an exaggeration to say that they were invincible. It was common for them to win with fewer people, especially after the Japanese army had adapted to the attack rhythm of the Foreign Alliance's C-rank army. It would be strange if the A-rank army did not suddenly appear and cause the enemy to panic. As for the new army, their combat strength was a bit weaker. If they were not cavalry, they would not be ranked as the army closest to the A-rank army. However, they had more people and more horses. Once the 30,000-strong cavalry launched an attack, just the aura they exuded was unstoppable. No one could match them. Facing such a strong army, not to mention that it was the time for peace talks, the Japanese army would not be prepared. Even if the enemy was prepared, so what? Yang Qindong was also confident that he could kill the enemy. One would throw away their armor, and the other would be utterly defeated. The 5-star army did indeed have such strength. All of this was not because Yang Qindong was arrogant. It was the result of battle after battle. Chapter 1079. While the 1st Cavalry Division was quickly assembling, the new army wasn't idle either. Commander Su He was mobilizing the troops according to the plan, and he had basically completed it. At this moment he was looking ahead, as if he could see through the distance of several miles and see the Japanese army's camp. In the past, Su He and Tian Hu had competed for the position of commander of the 1st Cavalry Division. But later he gave up. Of course, at that time the commander of the new army, Tiger's Mane, and the deputy commander were eager to let go of his talent. But more importantly, he himself understood that he was born as a surrendered general, and Tian Hu was the student of the 6th young master. He had already lost at the starting line. For a sharp blade like the 1st Cavalry Division, even the 6th young master, who had always been fair and just, would not easily hand it over to others. It was even more unlikely that he would hand it over to a fallen general like himself. After thinking things through, Su He took the initiative to give up, and sure enough he gained the favor of Yang Qindong, which was why he was now the commander of the new army. But without the current commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, Su He had always believed that it wasn't because he was inferior, but because of his background and environment. In order to prove himself, he had thought more than once about competing with Tian Hu. He wanted to use reality to tell everyone that he, Su He, was not inferior to Tian Hu, and was even stronger than him. Today was an opportunity. The new army and the 1st Cavalry Division were attacking the two wings of the Japanese army. Although in terms of combat power, the 1st Cavalry Division was indeed much stronger than the new army, and even the first established new army was no match for it. But with the advantage of numbers, he might still have a chance. Commander Ku, inform everyone to be in their best condition. We want the enemy to unconsciously feel weak and afraid when they hear the name of the new army. Su He called Kulu, the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, and ordered, "Yes, please rest assured. These days, everyone has been holding back their energy." Kulu said solemnly. In addition to being the vanguard in the first battle and capturing Tsushima Island, the new army rarely made any big moves, especially when facing the Japanese army in Changmen Prefecture. They had been watching the performance of the three foreign armies, and the brothers had been holding back. This was such a good opportunity to make a contribution, but they had no chance to participate. If the 1st Cavalry Division and the 1st Reserve Division weren't watching the show like them, some people would have expressed their dissatisfaction. Now that the opportunity had finally appeared, Kalu was of course very excited. It was said that a soldier who didn't want to be a general wasn't a good soldier, and the position of a division commander wasn't the end of Kalu's pursuit. He wanted to lead an army alone one day, or even more people to kill in all directions. Whether it was the 1st Cavalry Division or the new army, they were all ready to attack with all their strength. On the contrary, the 1st Reserve Division, who was in the middle of the attack, wasn't so excited. There was only one reason: they were infantry and their speed couldn't catch up with the cavalry. The commander of the 1st Reserve Division, Tsukuda, had also fought his way up through the flames of war. He was a fierce general with both courage and wisdom. Yang Qindong had taken a liking to him and promoted him to the position of commander of the 1st Reserve Division, becoming another dazzling new star in the military. Tsukuda was naturally very excited about Yang Qindong's favor. When he learned that he could come to the battlefield of the Japanese Empire, he wanted to perform well and make a great contribution to prove that the 6th young master didn't misjudge him. But today Tsukuda wasn't in a good mood. He actually had to go out with the 1st Cavalry Division and the new army to kill the enemy. Without the help of war horses, how could 2 legs outrun 4 legs? Pass down the order, don't rush too fast, tell everyone to save their strength. Tsukuda calmed down and said with a slightly disappointed tone. Commander, why? Is it because there are cavalry troops on both sides of us? The commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, Kang Biao, was puzzled. He was also a general who fought on the battlefield and could be said to have killed countless people. People like him often had a very obvious characteristic, and that was that he didn't know what death was. Seeing that Kang Biao was asking him why, Tsukuda said in a bad mood, yes, it's because they are cavalry and we can't keep up with them. Okay, you go and pass down the order, tell the brothers that this time, we will focus on capturing captives. Tsukuda, who had a strategy, had already decided on a position for himself. Since his speed wasn't as fast as his allies, then he might as well capture captives. This was also a great merit. In this way the left, middle and right sides were all ready to attack. When the hands on the watches on the 3 commanders' wrists pointed at the time of attack, the 5-star army moved madly, and the earth shook and the attack began. The cavalry troops on the left and right sides were the first to rush out. Looking from afar, they looked like a torrent that was rapidly approaching from afar. From afar, they covered the sky and covered the sun, bringing up billowing smoke and dust behind them. When looked at from afar, they were like arrows that had left the bow as they dashed over, and they carried an indomitable spirit and courage. From afar, their murderous aura filled the sky, giving people a feeling that they couldn't resist. The movement of the cavalry troops quickly attracted the attention of the opposite Japanese army. The moment the ground started to shake, some of the experienced veterans of the Japanese Empire quickly stood up. They first looked into the distance, wanting to see what had caused such a big movement. Then they got what they wanted. When they saw the countless cavalry troops in the distance and the bright 5-star flag, their faces changed from curiosity to panic and then to horror. Some of them were already trembling, some stood there stupidly, some turned around to get their weapons, and some couldn't help but retreat. They were ready to find a way to escape. In order to let the Japanese army have their own self-confidence, the higher-ups of the army suppressed the news that there was a large number of cavalry troops in the 5-star army. They only told them that the number of cavalry troops in the 5-star army was limited, and they wouldn't be able to play any role in such a big battle, so there was no need to worry. Originally, they didn't want to cause too much pressure on their own soldiers, but when the cavalry troops appeared, there was a huge contrast between what they understood and what they saw in reality. When they saw that the cavalry troops of the 5-star army were not a small group, but endless, the Japanese army was already in chaos. Hold on, archers, prepare to shoot, the rest of you prepare to stop the horses. The daimyo on the left side, Kazumi Kamikaze, was somewhat calm. Seeing the cavalry of the 5-star army getting closer and closer, he hurriedly gave the order. Although he didn't know what effect this would have, he couldn't take the lead to escape, right? As long as we can stop the cavalry's speed, we can wear them down. As if to encourage himself, and as if to give confidence to the soldiers below, Kazumi Kamikaze shouted loudly and issued the order. If Kazumi Kamikaze was a qualified commander, then Tanaka, who was guarding the right side, was too unprofessional. At this moment he was still sleeping in the big tent, so when the soldiers below came to call him, he still didn't open his eyes. Get some cold water, go. It was Tanaka's confidant, and he was also one of his subordinates, so he had no choice but to order the soldiers. A bucket of cold water was quickly brought, then poured on Tanaka's body. Tanaka was stimulated by the cold water and finally woke up. When he saw that all of this was caused by his own soldiers, he was so angry that he raised his hand and slapped the elder, then he shouted angrily, "Baka! Master!" After the elder slapped him, he lowered his head, but soon he raised his head again and said, "The 5-star army has launched an attack and they are using countless cavalry troops, let's run." What? Originally, he wanted to fiercely reprimand these daring soldiers, but when he heard the elder's words, he swallowed the words he wanted to say. He wanted to ask what was going on and whether he had heard wrongly, but then he felt the ground tremble, and then he rushed out of the big tent without caring about anything else. Then he saw the figures of the 5-star army cavalry in front of him. Using this short period of time, the 1st Cavalry Division that was attacking them was already in front of them, and Timur's troops charging at the front were even fighting with some of the Japanese army's vanguards. Without a unified command, even the arrows that were shot were scattered, and Tian, who led the cavalry of the 1st Cavalry Division to the front of the Japanese Empire's military camp without any obstacles, and began their crazy killing journey. As everyone knew, the strongest cavalry in the world was the Mongolian elite cavalry, and their most glorious period was under the leadership of Genghis Khan, when they conquered the world. Compared to the Mongol elite cavalry of that period, the world's #1 cavalry division was not any weaker. Especially since they had the 7-star steel crossbows and high-quality cavalry swords that Yang Qindong personally gave out. Their equipment was even better than the Mongol elite cavalry of that period. Yang Qindong was never stingy with what he could give, and the strength of the 1st Cavalry Division was also constantly charging forward. And if it was a battle of cold weapons, there was no one in the world who could be their opponent. Such an excellent cavalry unit, and they came prepared, their morale was high, and they were full of confidence. On the other hand, the Japanese army was not prepared at all, and the result was already decided when they charged forward. Now, it was just a matter of how long the defending side could defend and how big the losses were. Tanaka pushed open the curtain of the big tent, and what he saw was the 1st Cavalry Division charging forward, and no one could stop them. He even clearly saw the Japanese army in charge of the security of the perimeter being beheaded by cavalry swords. Chapter 1080. As the blood splattered through the air, Tanaka felt a chill on his neck. It was not that he had never been on the battlefield before. On the contrary, he had killed many people, sometimes in a very cruel way. But when he saw the 1st Cavalry Division killing everywhere, he couldn't help but feel scared. He had a feeling that this was an army that killed people like flies, and that the 50,000 Japanese army he led could not stop them. Retreat, retreat, run. Tanaka finally couldn't suppress the fear in his heart. After shouting these words like a madman, he turned around and ran. The elders and soldiers behind him had to do their best to catch up so that they wouldn't fall behind. The scene of Tanaka running out of the big tent was seen by many soldiers of the Japanese Empire. Limited by their knowledge, these ordinary soldiers, including many who had just joined the army, did not have a deep understanding of the strength of the 1st Cavalry Division. They even arrogantly thought that they had the advantage in numbers. The only thing they lacked was the commander. The general drank too much last night and no one was commanding them. The moment Tanaka appeared in front of the big tent, these soldiers seemed to have seen hope. Many of them had already clenched the swords in their hands, ready to fight back at any time. But then the general ran away without even leaving a decent sentence, which attracted the attention of the other soldiers. Then they looked at each other in confusion. They were completely confused by the general's performance. But after a moment of hesitation, many people made a wise choice. The soldiers of the Japanese Empire, who had already picked up their swords and guns, and even put on their armor, quickly scattered and ran away. The general had run away, so what was the point of staying here? Waiting to be killed or taken captive? As long as they weren't stupid, they ran away. At this time, it wasn't about who ran faster, but as long as you ran a little faster than your companions, you might be able to escape from misfortune. An army, no matter how many people there were and how much combat power they had, the moment their fighting spirit disappeared, they would be like chickens and dogs. There would be no threat at all. This was the case for the 50,000-strong Japanese army. When the 1st Cavalry Division rushed over and swept through the barracks like a gust of wind, what they faced was not the Japanese army that was putting up a desperate resistance. Instead, they were fleeing in all directions like defeated dogs. Division Master, what should we do? First Commander Taimur and the other commanders asked Tianhu in unison. Bai Shuang will lead the 4th Regiment and Gong Feng will lead the 5th Regiment to flank the enemy from the left and right. Try to keep as many Japanese army here as possible so that the 1st Reserve Division, abbreviation for the 1st Reserve Division, can get here soon. Capture as many prisoners as possible. The 1st Regiment, 2nd Regiment, and 3rd Regiment will follow me to help the new army. Tianhu only pondered for a few moments before he made his decision. The smoothness of this battle was somewhat beyond his expectations. He still didn't know why the Japanese army was so weak, but when he saw the 1st Division and the other 2 divisions fighting, he knew that the Japanese army wasn't all useless. Perhaps there was something he didn't know about. If he was lucky, then the new army's luck wouldn't be too good. He decided to go over and help. Of course, Tianhu wasn't a god. He still had some selfish motives in his heart. For example, the new army's commander Su he had been secretly competing with him. If there was a chance, Tianhu didn't mind helping him and showing his strength. Tianhu gave the order, and not long after, the army was divided into 3 groups. At this moment, on the battlefield of the new army, the situation was in a stalemate. Unlike Tanaka, Kazumi didn't drink. The command authority and organization of the army were still there. The generals under him were also doing their duty step by step. Although the appearance of the new army was indeed beyond his expectations, after losing about 5,000 troops on the periphery, Kazumi still led the soldiers to block the new army's attack. What's going on? When Commander Suhi saw that the front army was not making good progress, his face showed anger. He ordered someone to call the commander of the 2nd Cavalry Division, who was in charge of the vanguard. The commander of the 2nd Cavalry Division lowered his head. He wanted to explain that the Japanese army's defense was too tenacious. In addition, the ratio of veterans to recruits in the 2nd Cavalry Division was about the same, so they couldn't fully display their strength. This was why they couldn't achieve their military goal. But knowing Suhi's temperament, the commander lowered his head and didn't say anything. If they didn't complete the mission, any explanation would be useless. Humph, the 2nd Cavalry Division will be replaced. Commander Koyugo. After Suhi lost his temper, he turned his gaze to the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, Kulu. No matter what method you use, you must break the enemy's defense in at most 3 hours. Otherwise you don't have to come back to see me. Yes, Commander. Kulu also said with a dignified face, but at the same time he was also a little excited. The harder the battle on the battlefield, the more it showed the strength and characteristics of an army. In other words, after the challenge there were also opportunities. The 2nd Cavalry Division was forced to be replaced. The 1st Cavalry Division rushed forward and launched a new round of fierce attacks. Under the leadership of Kulu, the Japanese army on the opposite side was put under more pressure. Commander Kazumi couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief when he saw the 5-star Army's cavalry retreat like a tide. In his opinion, the other party should have seen his strength and retreated in the face of difficulties. But he didn't expect that soon. A new batch of cavalry began to charge, and this charge brought a lot of pressure to the front line. In less than half an hour, 5 generals had already asked for reinforcements. Seriously speaking, infantry was always at a disadvantage against cavalry. The reason why they were able to resist until now was because the Japanese army had already displayed their samurai spirit. They didn't fear hardship and they didn't fear death. This was why they were able to resist the charge of the cavalry under such heavy losses. What followed was not small. Just the front line of the army had already been replaced 3 times. The casualties could be said to be extremely heavy. If it wasn't for Kazumi's determination to resist, they would have been defeated like Tanaka. When the 6th general sent someone to ask for reinforcements, Kazumi's face was already very ugly. He looked around and asked, "How many reserve troops do we have now?" Reporting to the commander, "There are still about 20,000. A subordinate quickly reported the answer. When he heard that 50,000 troops were lost so quickly, Kazumi's face showed a surprised expression. The 5-star army really lived up to its reputation. But now wasn't the time to think about these things. He looked at the sky. There was still more than an hour before it would be dark. He gritted his teeth and said, "Send these 20,000 people up. No matter what, we have to hold on until dark. This way we can retreat under the cover of the poor light." At this time, Kazumi no longer had the intention to compete with the 5-star army. All he thought about was how to safely bring the army out and reduce the losses as much as possible. Without a doubt, the dark would be the best opportunity. At that time, everyone's vision would be poor. It would be the time for him to lead the army out of the battlefield. The Japanese army had increased their troops again. Seeing that the formation of arrows was about to break open a gap in the enemy's defense, more Japanese army rushed up to fill in the gaps. Commander Kulu had no choice but to give the order to retreat. In this charge, the 1st Cavalry Division lost nearly half of their men. Even if he, the division commander, personally took the role of the tip of the arrow, he only managed to kill a little more than the enemy. He also suffered some minor injuries. The Japanese army had increased their troops again. Commander Suhi saw this. He knew that the 1st Cavalry Division had done their best, so he didn't blame them. He also sent out the 3rd and 4th Cavalry Divisions who hadn't moved yet. Obviously, he also saw that the sky was getting dark. Once night fell, it would be impossible to completely wipe out the enemy. At this point, both sides had placed heavy bets. It was as if they would not stop until they fought to the death and a victor was decided. Because of this, the battlefield became very cruel. The death toll on both sides rose sharply. The ground was littered with corpses, and the pungent smell of blood made it hard for people to breathe. Time passed by slowly. After the Japanese Empire had sent out all 50,000 troops, the effect was very obvious. They used the corpses as stumbling blocks to slow down the new army's advance and speed. This showed the strength of the Japanese army's samurai. If things continued to develop like this, the new army would definitely win in the end. However, it would only be a small victory. After all, when faced with an army of 50,000 people with tenacious fighting spirit, it would be very difficult for anyone to win, unless they could hit the enemy with a single blow and completely disrupt their fighting spirit. And this possibility soon appeared. When the 1st Cavalry Division finally arrived at the side of the battlefield, Commander Tianhu gave a command. When 6,000 elite cavalrymen rushed over with their swords, the balance of the battlefield was broken. The sudden appearance of the 1st Cavalry Division was like a sudden appearance. Their appearance was not only beyond the expectations of the Wanatian army, but also beyond the expectations of the new Third Army. Why are they here? Could it be that they have already taken care of the enemies on the other side? When Commander Su He saw Tianhu leading his troops to attack from the side, a look of shock flashed across his face. Then he shook his head. He had to admit that the 1st Cavalry Division was worthy of the title of the strongest cavalry. Even if his cavalry division had more than 3 times the number of the enemy, it was still somewhat inferior in terms of fighting strength. Seeing that Tianhu had personally charged into the battlefield with his swords, Su He naturally wouldn't fall behind. With a shout, he led the 2nd Cavalry Division, which had rested for nearly 4 hours, to attack. At this point, the new army didn't have any backup plans. All 30,000 cavalrymen were on the battlefield. Chapter 1081. After the new army joined up with the 1st Cavalry Division, they already had more than 40,000 soldiers, and there wasn't much of a gap between them and the 50,000 Japanese army. In addition to the cavalry's suppression of the infantry as well as the heavy casualties of the Japanese army, this attack was completely one-sided. Very quickly, the tip of the arrow's formation pierced through the enemy's defense, and the two sides finally engaged in a chaotic battle, beginning to crush each other. They only relied on their advantage in numbers to form a human shield, blocking the cavalry's charge. But when the two sides had equal military strength, especially with the sudden attack of the 1st Cavalry Division, it was tantamount to completely breaking the previous balance. Although Tianhu's cavalry didn't have many people, their combat power was really amazing. Wherever they passed, not to mention people escaping, they didn't even leave behind many captives, which fully demonstrated their fierce and bloodthirsty side. This was seen by even more Japanese army, and the fighting spirit in their hearts was wiped out. No one knew who took the lead and shouted, "Run!" Then the army's morale collapsed, and the entire front line was disintegrating. No matter how much Kazumi shouted or ordered, it was completely useless. Since Kazumi was shouting so happily, he became Tianhu's target. As the most powerful tip of the arrows, he led an extremely elite team of 30 people to crush all the way. No one was his opponent, and they quickly rushed to a place less than 100 meters away from Kazumi. When they rushed to this place, Tianhu observed from the corner of his eyes that there was another cavalry team rapidly approaching. It was the commander of the new army, Su He. His eyes flashed with a smile, and then he urged his horse to gallop. Under Su He's slightly anxious gaze, he crossed the 100 meters distance to Kazumi's side. The commander of the Japanese Empire, who had been defending the position, saw the 5-star army cavalry coming in front of him, but his face was still as calm as water. He calmly pulled out the katana on his body, and made a posture that he was going to fight to the death. Kazumi, who had been practicing martial arts since he was young, had some martial arts. Although his individual combat power was not as good as the ninjas of the Japanese Empire, he was still qualified as a samurai. He was already prepared to cut down the 5-star army cavalry. He wanted to let the 5-star army know that as a commander of the Japanese army, he wasn't worse than anyone else, and he wouldn't allow anyone to have any ideas about him. Dang! Golden sparks flew, which was the golden sparks produced by the heavy force of the cavalry sword and the katana. Under the heavy force of the katana, Kazumi couldn't help but take a few steps back. He didn't expect the strength of the 5-star army cavalry to be so great. His arm was already sore from just one strike. But what he didn't expect was that when Kazumi was still thinking of using the force of his retreat to prepare for the second strike, another cavalry sword appeared in front of him. Then he felt a pain in his neck and there was a sweet taste in his throat. His vision began to blur and his perception began to decline. He struggled with all his strength, and with the last of his strength, he looked down and saw that his chest had already been dyed red with blood. The blood wasn't anyone else's, it was his own. It was the second katana that Tianhu suddenly pulled out and performed a miraculous feat he didn't expect it at all, and with a single strike he ended his life. Kazumi was dead. Although Tianhu was forced to use the second katana, because the process was too fast, It gave people the feeling that their commander had died tragically on the horse. Seeing this scene, the soldiers of the Japanese Empire, who originally wanted to hold on, turned pale. Without a commander, there was no unified command. Without a commander, it was like a group of dragons without a leader, and their fighting spirit was rapidly fading. Defeat was imminent, and there was no way to reverse the situation. The cavalry of the five-star army was running all over the battlefield, and around them, more and more Japanese army were kneeling and surrendering. Anyone who wanted to escape by chance was greeted with sharp cavalry swords or arrows from afar. The situation was settled. Nishi Tohide was still waiting in the five-star army's camp. Ever since he came here to see King Wunan of Daemyeong, he was trapped in this military tent. There were people who sent him food and drinks, but no one paid attention to him. When he wanted to go out and say that he wanted to see Bugnam of Gojoseon, there would always be people from the five-star army in front of him. When they were annoyed by the questions, these soldiers would use Yang Qindong's health as an excuse to delay the meeting. After knowing that Yang Qindong was unwell, Nishi Tohide still hoped that he would die of illness somewhere else, so that the Japanese Empire would have one less strong opponent. But in his heart, he warned himself that this was simply impossible. Not to mention that he had seen Yang Qindong before he was very young and his health was very good. As a commander, there must be a lot of people taking care of him. How could he get sick so easily? If he wasn't sick, why didn't Yang Qindong want to see him, and why didn't he talk to him? Could it be, Nishi Tohide was very smart? Because of this, he thought of a terrible result. Could it be that Yang Qindong used the peace talks as bait to numb the army behind him, and then he would take the opportunity to do something? No matter how smart he was, he didn't think that Yang Qindong would launch an all-out attack. After all, both sides had fought for a day or two, and the strength of both sides had long been known during the war. Even if they wanted to launch a surprise attack, at most they would have some advantages in the beginning. Once the Japanese Empire's army reacted, the five-star army would not be able to gain any advantages. They didn't know the real situation of the five-star army at all. The main reason was that Yang Qindong had disguised himself well. For more than a month he had only sent out the Foreign Alliance army. No matter how hard the battle was, he didn't send out any elites. Not only that, but he also selected the veterans who had been on the battlefield and withdrew them from the battlefield. This made the Japanese army united, and they all had the idea of looking down on the five-star army. On the battlefield, any idea of looking down on the opponent could very likely lead to a fatal disaster. Unfortunately, everyone knew this, but not many people could easily do it. Nishi Tohide, who had confidence in the Japanese army and looked down on the five-star army, couldn't think of what Yang Qindong was planning. He simply stopped thinking about it and ate, drank, and slept well in the tent. He acted as if he wasn't in a hurry and the five-star army should be in a hurry. 4 days later, when Nishi Tohide was still sleeping comfortably in the tent, a few soldiers from the five-star army came and said that the sixth young master wanted to see him. At this time, Nishi Tohide's face showed a trace of pride. What, he couldn't play psychological warfare anymore, and wanted to prepare for peace talks. He was ready to fight for more benefits for the Supreme General Ashikaga Yoshimasa. That's right. Ning Shiduoshio regarded the house arrest as Yang Qindong's probing. In his view, it was obvious that he had won. For this reason, when he walked all the way to the main tent, Nishi Tohide's face still had a confident and proud smile. He even imagined the moment when Yang Qindong would admit defeat. But all of this changed when he came outside the main tent and saw Kazumi's head placed outside the tent. He no longer had that smug look on his face. Instead, he broke out in a cold sweat. Ning Shiduoshio was already inexplicably shocked. He really couldn't figure out why General Kazumi's head would appear here. Wasn't he defending the front line of Changmen Prefecture with 50,000 Japanese troops? On his side, there was another 50,000 Japanese army led by Wadamura. With these 100,000 people forming a strong line of defense, how could they die here? His face was full of confusion, but his whole body was already covered in cold sweat. When he entered the main tent and saw the sand table in front of him, he noticed that most of the Changmen Prefecture's territory had been planted with red flags. The fear in his heart was even more serious. You killed General Kazumi? Under nervousness, Nishi Tohide no longer had the confident look he had when he was holding the Pearl of Wisdom. He said with a frightened expression. Sitting above the main tent, Yang Qindong's face was like spring. Facing Nishi Tohide's question, he didn't immediately answer. Instead, he looked at the petite Junko and smiled. Junko seemed to have received some kind of hint. First, she smiled at Yang Qindong, then looked at Nishi Tohide, who entered the tent, and said, "Yes, he is dead. He dared to disobey the emperor's order and helped Ashikaga Yoshimasa. This is what they deserve." As the former princess of the Japanese Empire, Junko hated Ashikaga Yoshimasa, including those who followed the general. In her heart, she hoped that these people would be buried with her father. Kazumi's death was just the beginning. Junko said this with anger, which made Nishi Tohide's face become even uglier. He saw Junko's anger and knew that this was the result of her emotions. Whether it was out of self-esteem or because of his long-standing patriarchal mentality, he decided not to argue with Junko even though she was a princess. Instead, he looked at Yang Qindong and asked, "Bugnam of Gojoseon, aren't we negotiating? Did you just kill our people like this? This is not good." Nishi Tohide originally wanted to reprimand Yang Qindong verbally, but considering that he was in the enemy's tent, if his words were too harsh and angered Yang Qindong, he was afraid that the next result would be the same as Kazumi's. Being wronged and unable to speak out, this was the so-called diplomacy of a weak country. Junko didn't care about Ningshi Duishio's feelings. From the moment she tried to kill her mother and killed her father and brother, she was already at odds with these military clans of the Neon country. Now that she was Yang Qindong's wife, both in her heart and in her body, her mentality had changed. Everything was for Yang Qindong's benefit. As for these former compatriots, she didn't care whether they lived or died. Junko didn't care, but Yang Qindong couldn't. He was very clear that although this battle was won, the military strength of the Japanese Empire was still there. The combined strength of the army and navy was still several times his own. If he continued to choose to fight with force, even if there was a day when he could defeat the enemy, he was afraid that he would have to pay a heavy price. Chapter 1082. None of this was what Yang Qindong wanted. What he wanted was to take over the entire Japanese Empire without breaking any bones. In order to achieve this goal, he knew very well when to be tough and when to back down. Now that he had opened the door, it was time for others to perform. Now, he had to think about how to preserve his strength in the coming chaos. And in order to do this, the first step was to convince Nishi Toshiru. No one said that we can't fight during peace talks, not to mention that we haven't reached any agreement yet. So, you don't have to feel wronged on this point. Yang Qindong said with a lofty look. Although he was already prepared to back down in terms of momentum before he achieved his goal, he still had to pretend that he was in the right and that he was not going to let go. Yang Qindong's words were like a heavy hammer hitting Nishi Toshiru's chest, making him a little breathless. But as a smart person, and even the think tank that Ashikaga Yoshimasa relied on, he quickly heard the difference in Yang Qindong's words. The biggest difference between a smart person and a stupid person was that they could turn bad things in a direction that was beneficial to them. Those who did it well were smart and those who didn't did it well were stupid. Bugnam of Gojoseon, are you saying that as long as we reach an agreement, you won't fight with us anymore? Yang Qindong was a little surprised that Nishi Toshiru caught the meaning of his words so quickly. But this was good as it would save him a lot of effort. He nodded and said, "Yes, our 5-star army is also peace-loving. We have always had a friendly relationship with the Japanese Empire. This time, if you didn't attack my wife's family, do you think we would be willing to come all the way here to fight this war?" Yang Qindong admitted it, which made Nishi Toshiru see new hope. He immediately said, Yes, we acted recklessly before. I also sincerely apologize to Princess Junko for the death of the Emperor and Empress, and I am willing to compensate her. I just hope that Bugnam of Gojoseon will stop the war for the sake of the people who are suffering because of it. For this you can make any request. Nishi Toshiru's meaning was very clear. He was willing to compensate Yang Qindong, and he was even willing to make great concessions. He just wanted Yang Qindong to stop the advance of the 5-star army in exchange for a temporary peace in the Japanese Empire. Of course, it was also to free up the hands of Supreme General Ashikaga Yoshimasa to deal with all the opponents who jumped out, and to buy time for the reunification of the Japanese Empire. How could such a small idea be hidden from Yang Qindong? But this was exactly what he needed, so he nodded as if he didn't see anything. Well, seeing that you are so sincere, this king can consider it. No. Just as Yang Qindong finished speaking, Junko loudly objected. They killed my father Emperor, my mother Empress, and my brother. We can't let them go so easily. I want all the killers to pay with their lives. When Junko shouted like this, Nishi Toshiru's face became bitter. Originally, he thought that things had taken a turn for the better, but if Princess Junko objected, it was really hard to say how things would develop. Well, women shouldn't interrupt when men are talking. Yang Chendong suddenly spoke. He changed his previous understanding look and said very seriously like a male chauvinist. It was as if he didn't know Yang Chendong. Junko widened her eyes and looked at her husband in disbelief. Was this still the teacher she admired the most from the bottom of her heart? Was this still the sixth young master who gave her the feeling of a gentleman and was the most considerate person? Was this still the king who she was willing to give up everything, including her body? At this moment, Junko's face was constantly changing. Did she think that she was deceived? Did she think that after her family left, she had found a home and a backer in her life? Did she think that this man who she had always had a good impression of and trusted the most would definitely avenge her? But everything that happened now clearly told her that all of this was impossible. The other party was still a person who put benefits first, a person who was cold and ruthless to achieve his goals. Did he just want to deceive her into writing the document to announce to the world? Did he just want to deceive her feelings and body? Junko still looked at Yang Chendong with a look of astonishment, and even the tears in the corners of her eyes couldn't stop flowing out. Those were tears of sadness, tears of regret. This scene stunned Ningxi Duoxiu, who was at the side. But what was even more surprising was that Yang Chendong turned a blind eye to all of this and said to the people outside the tent, "Come, send the 8th madam back to rest." Immediately, Beta Persei came in with Tu Longwei and politely asked Junko to leave. Junko didn't refuse. She knew that once Yang Chendong gave the order, everything she did would be in vain, so she was very cooperative. But when she left, she fiercely stared at Yang Chendong, as if everyone's hatred was undoubtedly expressed in this one glance. After Junko left, the big tent became quiet again. Yang Chendong looked at Ningxi Duoxiu, who was still in a daze, and said, "What's wrong? Don't you want to continue the negotiation?" Yes. Ningxi Duoxiu seemed to have just recovered, and took the initiative to say with some enthusiasm. Junko was escorted back to her tent, and then lay on the bed and cried bitterly. She once thought that even if her parents and brother left her, she would not be lonely, because there was a man who would take care of her, cherish her, and protect her. But all of this was destroyed because of what happened just now. She felt like she had just met Yang Chendong and regretted it. At the same time, she secretly hated herself for being so stupid. She didn't even know that she had become a chess piece in his hands. She cried bitterly, and even when the maid Miko and the guard Xiaolin appeared, they were driven out by her. Now she just wanted to cry alone. She cried for more than half an hour, and then under extreme mental exhaustion she fell asleep. She didn't know how much time had passed, until she felt a warm body on the cold bed. She habitually leaned over, looking for the chest that she thought was the most solid in her heart. But when she just leaned against the warm chest, Junko suddenly thought of something and suddenly opened her eyes. When she saw that it was indeed her husband Yang Chendong lying beside her, she didn't know where she got the strength and courage, but she struggled to get up, and broke free from the restraint of Yang Chendong's right arm. "Lie down." Feeling that Junko was really resisting, Yang Chendong suddenly said, and at the same time increased the strength of his arm and pressed Junko to his side again. Junko gasped for breath, feeling that Yang Chendong was angry, but she wasn't afraid, because she could no longer see the hope of life, and she had already decided to die. Since that was the case, what was there to be afraid of? At most she would die. "Let go of me? You liar." While struggling with all his might, he continued to shout. It was clear that he was not going to give in no matter what. "How did I lie to you?" A gentle voice suddenly sounded in her ear. Then Yang Chendong's arms exerted a little force, and completely controlled Junko, making her unable to move. His voice sounded again, "I remember that in class sometimes we shouldn't believe our eyes and ears, because what they represent may not be the most true side. Do you still remember?" Junko was stunned by this sentence. What kind of situation was this? Why was he still thinking of teaching her? Did he really think that she was a fool? A naive girl who was deceived but still obedient. She wanted to continue resisting, but then Yang Chendong's voice sounded in her ear again. "Give me half a quarter of an hour to explain. If you still want me to leave after hearing what I have to say, I will agree. How about it?" The magnetic voice sounded, and it was particularly pleasant to hear. For some reason, Junko became quiet. Maybe she didn't believe that Yang Chendong would deceive her, and she always wanted an explanation. Junko became obedient, and Yang Chendong's voice sounded in her ear. In just a moment, Junko's face began to change. First it was surprise, then it was surprise, and finally it became surprise. After Yang Chendong finished, Junko hurriedly said, "You mean, everything before was just an act, just to make Ningxi Duoxiu and Ashikaga Yoshimasa behind her lower their guard?" "Yes. Yang Qindong nodded. Just now he was explaining this matter to Junko. He was making Ningxi Daxia lower her guard, because he knew that she was very smart, and it was not easy to make her fall into his trap, so he came up with such a trick. Sure enough, Junko cooperated very well. Because the act was enough, the following negotiation was very smooth. At this moment, Ningxi Daxia had reached a consensus with Yang Qindong and left the five-star army's camp. Junko, who finally knew everything, had forgiven Yang Qindong in her heart, but on the surface she still pretended to be angry and said, "If that's the case, why didn't you tell me in advance so that I could be prepared? If you told me in advance, would you still be able to perform so perfectly? Would you still be able to deceive Ningxi Daxia?" Yang Qindong asked. This time Junko didn't speak. Indeed, if she knew everything in advance, she wouldn't be able to perform so well. If she couldn't even deceive herself, how could she deceive others? Wouldn't that delay Yang Qindong's plan? Chapter 1083. Seeing the understanding look on Junko's face, Yang Qindong chuckled. Well, don't be angry. I didn't have a choice just now. Besides, Nishi Toshihide has promised that it won't take long for him to be sent to the camp. At that time he will be handed over to you. You can deal with him however you want, okay? Yang Qindong took the initiative to explain, apologize and reason. He showed his sincerity. With his current status, it was very difficult for him to say these things. Junko knew that going too far was as bad as falling short. She smiled and said, "Well, since you are so sincere, then I will forgive you." It's just forgiveness. After I do this, it's equivalent to avenging you. Shouldn't there be a reward? Yang Qindong smiled and said. His big hand had already moved on Junko's body. With a cry of surprise, Junko soon started to pant. The entire garden was intoxicating. After Nishi Toshihide left the five-star army's camp, he rushed all the way to the Anyun district, appeared in the main tent of the Japanese Empire's camp, and appeared in front of Supreme General Ashikaga Yoshimasa. He rushed back, even rushed day and night, just to tell the Supreme General the conditions that he and Yang Qindong agreed. The army couldn't be the enemy of the five-star army. It was too dangerous and full of too many unknowns. Ninji Dosu rushed back. Ashikaga Yoshimasa received him in the main tent, but his face was dark the whole time. He looked very unhappy. It was no wonder. Previously he sent this person over to stop the war. As a result, he lost nearly 100,000 troops and lost his territory in Changmen Prefecture. How could he not be angry? All of this was because he trusted Ningxi Duoxiu too much. Now that the main character was here, it was time to settle the score. Supreme General, good news, good news. Ninhei Dosu knew that the army had suffered a great loss because of him, so when the two sides met, he called out to Ashikaga Yoshimasa in order to give himself a chance to speak. Otherwise, based on his understanding of Ashikaga Yoshimasa, Ashikaga Yoshimasa would probably push him out of the tent and behead him. This was very useful, at least it made Ashikaga Yoshimasa interested. Good news? What good news? Since the Supreme General asked, Nishi Toshihide finally had the opportunity to speak. He immediately told the process and the result of his negotiation with Yang Qindong. This talk took a long time, and Ashikaga Yoshimasa frowned and narrowed his eyes. Finally, when Nishi Toshihide finished, Ashikaga Yoshimasa also asked, "You said that you have negotiated with Bugnam of Gojoseon to give the other party the entire Shanyang-dao region, and the other party has promised that they will not be enemies with us, right?" Yes, Bugnam of Gojoseon said so. In order to ensure that there will be no problems, I also drafted an agreement with Bugnam of Gojoseon's name and seal as proof. Nishi Toshihide took out a document and handed it to Ashikaga Yoshimasa. On the document, Yang Qindong's name and seal were indeed on it, and it also recorded the results of the negotiation. For example, as long as the five-star army has occupied the West Sea province and the Shanyang-dao region, then they can make a guarantee and promise to coexist peacefully with the Supreme General. Unless the other party takes the initiative to send troops to attack them, otherwise this agreement will be valid for a long time. Taking out two regions in one go was equivalent to publicly admitting that they belonged to the five-star army. This was no different from betraying the country. Ashikaga Yoshimasa was a little hesitant. He was considering the consequences of doing this. Seeing Ashikaga Yoshimasa's hesitation, Nishi Toshihide was afraid that he would not agree in a fit of anger, so he hurriedly said, "Supreme General, although it seems that we have suffered some losses, you can deal with the five-star army. But without the five-star army as a major enemy, you can free yourself to deal with the other opposing forces." As long as you annihilate all those people and take their forces as your own, you will control the 5 major regions. At that time you won't have any worries. Wouldn't it be easy to deal with the 5-star army? In the end, this is still our Japanese Empire's territory. In the words of the Han people, even a strong dragon cannot suppress a local snake. Nishi Toshihide had a good plan. From the beginning to the end, he did not have any intention of giving in to the 5-star army. Everything was just a temporary measure. He only wanted to buy time to stabilize the rear and increase his strength. This was also why he dared to agree to this agreement and personally appeared in front of Ashikaga Yoshimasa to persuade him. Ashikaga Yoshimasa's days were not easy at all. Ever since the death of the emperor, he knew that there was going to be a storm. Otherwise, why didn't he take the initiative to kill his way into the palace and destroy the royal family? Why did he allow them to be high and mighty? At the very least, that was the impression he gave to outsiders. Kuki Kiyoshi had killed the emperor's entire family without any warning. This had indeed brought him a lot of trouble. Fortunately, the Japanese Empire was currently in a period of chaos. This was where his hope lay. There shouldn't be many people paying attention to the royal family. However, Princess Junko's announcement to the world changed everything. For a time, his forces became an existence that everyone wanted to kill. It seemed that if one wanted to become the legitimate force, they only needed to scold them and send troops to fight them to prove that they were legitimate. Because of this, not only were the troops temporarily unable to be recruited in time, but the 5-star army was also suddenly pressing on the front. With an interception in front and a pursuit behind, Ashikaga Yoshimasa was already in a dangerous situation. If the 5-star army suddenly stopped attacking, this would undoubtedly give him a chance to catch his breath. With enough time, he would be able to get rid of those people who wanted to beat him while he was down. Ning Shidoxia saw this and agreed to Yang Qindong's request without asking for permission. He also believed that as long as Ashikaga Yoshimasa wasn't stupid, he would definitely make the wisest and smartest choice. To be able to become a great general, not only was he brave, but Ashikaga Yoshimasa was also a very smart person. He only hesitated for a moment before nodding heavily. Fine, let's give the Sanyang path to the 5-star army first. However, I will soon let them know that eating this great general's food is not that easy to swallow. Ashikaga Yoshimasa agreed and then issued a few orders. The 400,000 Japanese Empire troops stationed in the Sanyang path began to retreat. After leaving the Sanyang path, they didn't return to Ping in Beijing. Instead, they went straight to the Hokuriku, Tokai and Shanin paths. There were already many warlords of the Japanese Empire there who wanted to take advantage of the chaos. Now was the time to deal with them. The Japanese army withdrew and gave up the entire Sanyang path. Yang Qindong, who was already prepared, immediately gave an order. Then the 5-star army quickly moved forward and occupied the empty area that was not guarded by any army. Considering that they left in a hurry, most of the 2 million people of the Japanese Empire in the Sanyang path didn't leave. Faced with such a large number of people, Yang Qindong immediately ordered them to board the transport ships and move them away. Yang Qindong never had a good impression of the Japanese Empire, so he didn't have much feelings for the people here. In order to complete this task, he also authorized the division commanders under him to threaten the people of the Japanese Empire if they resisted and refused to leave with the ships. However, it was best not to kill them. Of course, if they encountered people who were very cooperative, they had to deal with them with a smile. After all, these people would become Yang Xie's people in the future. Just as Yang Qindong expected, during the migration process, they did encounter some resistance from the people of the Japanese Empire. They used the reason that they had lived here for generations and refused to obey the orders of the 5-star army. There were even some people who wanted to take advantage of the fact that there were many people around them and scolded the 5-star army. There were even some who directly threatened to attack them. Towards these people, the soldiers of the 5-star army who had already received orders didn't show any mercy. Those who scolded him were given a few punches and slaps to teach him a lesson. Those who threatened him with force were given a round of beatings, causing him to be seriously injured. According to Yang Qindong, other than not taking their lives, he had done everything he could to beat and scold them. For this matter, the 5-star army also prepared for a large-scale cleanup if the local people resisted. For this reason, the matter was also reported to Yang Qindong. If something unexpected happened, he would order the encirclement and suppression order. In response to this request, Yang Qindong smiled and didn't sign it. Instead, he confidently said to Beta Persei, who sent the letter, "Don't worry, these people won't dare to do anything. As long as we show enough strength, they will definitely be more obedient than anyone else. Yang Qindong was used to the development and current situation of the Japanese Empire in later generations, so he naturally understood them very well. So when this order was issued to the army, some people thought that the sixth young master was too confident. Seeing that they were about to leave their homeland where they had lived for many years, how many people would be willing to obey? Regardless of whether the people below had doubts or not, the truth was the most real thing. When the five-star army showed their fists, the people of the Japanese Empire really became a lot more obedient. Those who took the initiative to jump out and wanted to use the fact that there were many people around them to cause trouble discovered that when the five-star army really did not hold back, their fellow countrymen and even their neighbors chose to stand by and watch. They chose to ignore it and stay out of it. This was naturally related to the national characteristics of the Japanese Empire. This was a nation that advocated the strong and powerful. Just like in later generations when the Americans threw out 2 bombs, they who were originally arrogant became obedient. Later, when the Americans stationed troops on their island and repeatedly did some things that angered the heavens, nothing happened. In this regard, Wuxia's performance was much better than the Japanese Empire. In the face of the invasion and even domination by foreign races, they had been constantly resisting. Even if they knew that the hope was very small, there were still people who did it. Just like when the Ming Dynasty was destroyed and the Qing Dynasty was established, the so-called third prince of the Ming Dynasty also lasted for hundreds of years and resisted for hundreds of years. Chapter 1084. Speaking of which, after the five-star army showed their fists, the 2 million citizens of the Japanese Empire began their migration. For this reason, Yang Qindong had already informed the various provinces and regions to prepare for the reception work. At the same time, the citizens of the various provinces who were preparing to migrate to the Japanese Empire began to move towards the Japanese Empire. A migration of different ethnic groups was underway. Yang Qindong's timing was very good. While Ashikaga Yoshimasa was clearing out the internal forces, he carried out his own activities to minimize the possibility of being harassed and disrupted. For example, Ashikaga Yoshimasa had received news that the five-star army had taken away the citizens of the empire and replaced them with other foreigners. However, he couldn't do anything about it. At the moment he was focused on clearing out and dealing with the other domestic forces. The flat well field in the northern land was one of the main targets to be dealt with. This person was originally an important minister that the emperor relied heavily on. He had once come up with many ideas to deal with Ashikaga Yoshimasa, but in the end he had angered Ashikaga Yoshimasa. Considering that it wasn't time to fall out with the royal family, the Supreme General transferred this person to the northern land, which wasn't very big. He hoped that time would slowly grind this person down. Unexpectedly, after a short period of time, the flat well field had become a force to be reckoned with. Not only did it forcefully unify the northern land, but it also created an army of 100,000 people, which became the strongest army to oppose the Supreme General's forces. When Princess Junko's decree was announced to the world, this person was the first to respond, which influenced the other warlords. After that, everyone took pride in beating and cursing Ashikaga Yoshimasa's army. Whoever did this would be the rightful ruler. Supreme General Ashikaga Yoshimasa relied on forceful methods to get to where he was today. How could he just watch others beat and curse him without retaliating? In order to show his strength, he didn't choose the weak at the beginning. Instead, he targeted the flat well field directly. He wanted to let others know what the consequences of angering him were. He wanted to see if anyone dared to oppose him in the future. Ashikaga Yoshimasa's army was constantly being mobilized. In the blink of an eye, it had reached 250,000 soldiers. However, it seemed that it wasn't enough. More soldiers were coming to the northern land. The flat well field, which only had 100,000 soldiers, was also under great pressure. He was also preparing his counterattack. For example, he kept trying to rope in the surrounding warlords, big and small, in order to fight against the Supreme General's army. For example, he spread the rumor that the Supreme General was a threat. He claimed that once he was eliminated, the other warlords would soon follow in his footsteps. For example, he used the reason that the Supreme General had given up the entire Mountain Sun path to the five-star army. He reprimanded the Supreme General for his actions of betraying the country. He also complained about the 2 million people of the Japanese Empire who were about to be relocated. He used to follow the Emperor of the Garden. He learned what it meant to take advantage of the situation and what it meant to oppress people with power. The flat well field played tricks with what he was good at. When all kinds of rumors spread, there were indeed voices of opposition to Ashikaga Yoshimasa, especially when the 2 million people of the Mountain Sun Path were indeed being relocated. Once the news spread, it attracted many people's opposition. With the mentality of bullying the weak and fearing the strong, they did not have the intention to attack the 5-star army. In just 2 days, the news of the Japanese Empire's 100,000 soldiers being wiped out had already spread. The strength of the 5-star army was painted with a mysterious symbol. Not daring to provoke the 5-star army did not mean that they would not do anything. For example, they could always attack the Supreme General Ashikaga Yoshimasa's army. Although this force was very big, there were also many opponents. As long as the small forces gathered together, they still had the power to fight. The flat well fields tactics worked. For their own survival, more and more small warlords joined the army to resist Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who asked this person to be so strong that he broke the original balance. The news spread to the Supreme General's ears one by one. Ashikaga Yoshimasa was furious. If he had known that the flat well field was so talkative and difficult to deal with, he would have killed this person when he was in the palace to prevent future troubles. Now it was too late to say anything. The only thing he could do was to send out troops to eliminate this person. With this as an example, he wanted to see who would dare to make an enemy out of him. After Yang Qindong came to the Japanese Empire, an even bigger civil war broke out. After gathering an army of 300,000, Ashikaga Yoshimasa personally took up the role of the Supreme General and began to attack and occupy the Hokuriku. The flat well field also joined forces with the 50,000 warlords in the surrounding area. Thus, a chaotic war between the 400,000-strong army began. When an even bigger civil war broke out in the Japanese Empire, the one who was happy was Yang Qindong. Taking advantage of this opportunity, he methodically moved the citizens of the Japanese Empire in exchange for a large number of foreign citizens. He continued to forge a new Japanese empire. At the same time, even more foreign allied forces were sent to the front lines of the Japanese Empire. After the original Foreign 1st Division, the Foreign 2nd Division, and the Foreign 3rd Division, the Foreign 4th Division and the Foreign 5th Division also arrived. The 5-star Army's army in the Japanese Empire reached 200,000 people. There were 150,000 of them on land and 50,000 on the sea. It was fine if he didn't make a move, but when he did, it would be a war that would destroy the country. This was how decisive Yang Qindong was when doing things. He had been eyeing the Japanese Empire for a long time, but the time hadn't come yet. The moment he made a move would be the moment when the entire Japanese Empire changed its name. The Japanese Empire's territory wasn't small. The main thing was that it had a large population. The various powers intertwined with each other, and there were even specialized samurai and ninja armies. Furthermore, the internal structure of the island was complicated, and it wasn't easy to take it down. It would take a long time. The war here also left Yang Qindong and part of the 5-star Army's main force here. In the outside world, when they found out that Bugnam of Gojoseon and part of the 5-star Army's main force were left behind in the Japanese Empire and couldn't leave, some powers became restless. Since the establishment of the 5-star Army, which was known as a mercenary army, was terrifyingly powerful. They were good at fighting like a snake swallowing an elephant. They were good at fighting lightning and quick battles. At the same time, they had also won countless battles with a small number of people. It was precisely because of these characteristics that Yang Xie was able to develop and grow, but at the same time, it was also feared by many powers. Because until now, no one knew what the 5-star Army's ultimate goal was. What did they want to do? To what extent did they want to expand? If it was said that before, some people thought that Yang Xie was just making a small fuss, and that the places he chose were barren and barren, then with North Korea, Luzon, and especially now with the war against the Japanese, these thoughts were finally about to change. Whether it was the grassland, the Phnom Penh dynasty, the Awa dynasty, or other places, although they were also a power, they weren't very important in everyone's eyes. The poverty of the grassland was well known. Otherwise, there wouldn't be expansion and invasions time and time again, and there wouldn't be the saying of threshing fields. The various powers in the south, from the earliest Jiaoji and Lansang kingdom to the later Phnom Penh and Awa kingdom, had always been regarded as barren and uncivilized areas. Even if someone occupied those areas, they wouldn't be seen as a big threat. However, when these areas all belonged to the same power, and the 5-star Army had successively conquered Luzon and North Korea, and started to march towards the Japanese Empire, the various powers finally became vigilant and felt a sense of crisis in their hearts. They knew that if they continued to underestimate the 5-star Army in Yang Xie, there would be a day when they would become the next target. Among them, the Great Ming Dynasty, which was famous in the vicinity and was often regarded as one of the most powerful states in the Celestial Empire, was the most worried. The Emperor of Baiming Zhu Qiu was one of the most worried. Looking at the map in front of him, other than the southern Ming Dynasty in the south and the northern wasteland in the north, his west and east were all occupied by the five-star army. In other words, if he were to encounter danger, he wouldn't even have a place to retreat. Although Baiming's strength wasn't bad, especially in the past few years, they had been vigorously developing their military, allowing them to have an army of several million soldiers. This gave them a feeling of transcendence when facing any power. However, when facing the five-star army, he still didn't have enough confidence. We can't let the five-star army continue to develop like this. Zhu Qiu looked at the map on the wall and muttered to himself, but it was as if he had made up his mind. Ever since he received the 5 million taels of silver from Yang Qindong and established the Baiming Bank, Zhu Qiu used various methods to increase the amount of silver he could use. His self-confidence also continued to grow, and some of the goals he had set before also began to change. His original plan was to defend against the invasion of the grassland tribes in the west, defeat the southern Ming Dynasty in the south, and unify the Ming Dynasty. As for the five-star army, being able to be a king with a different surname was already a great honor. But now this plan had to change. It wasn't for anything else, but because the rise of the five-star army was too fast. It was so fast that it had already become a colossus, an existence that couldn't be ignored. If they weren't careful, it could even become the biggest threat. There had never been any true friendship between countries, only mutual benefits. In the past, the five-star army had the opportunity to continuously develop and strengthen, but it hadn't reached a level where it could make people wary. At most, they would be afraid. However, now that the war with the Japanese Empire had begun, according to the five-star army's usual practice, it was very likely that it wouldn't be long before this place became one of the new Yangtze's territories. At this moment, some people could no longer endure. First, Baiming's Zhu Qiu made a move. He didn't even inform any of the court officials. Perhaps he was already a little worried about these people. He sent out a group of eunuchs who were completely loyal to him. He sent eunuchs secretly to the southern Ming Empire and the grasslands. For the sake of safety, even the chief eunuch Jin Ing was bypassed. However, because this person's goal was too big, some confidential matters were left in his hands, making people feel uneasy. This time, Zhu Qiu found the Imperial Horse Supervisor Eunuch and East Factory Manager Gao Rang, who was second only to the Ceremony Directorate of the 24 Directorates. He handed the matter over to him to handle. Chapter 1085. Gao Rang didn't disappoint. He quickly found his confidants and arranged for them to secretly travel to the southern Ming Empire and the Wara's leader, Yes Hen. To be able to become the leader of a faction, all of them were intelligent people. Even if they were confused for a short while, they would quickly make the right choice after being reminded. There was no doubt that the southern Ming Emperor Zhu Qizhen and the Wala's leader Yes Hen were both such people. The southern Ming Empire was currently considering its own unification. It seemed like the problem of the little prince of Nanming had been solved, but Zhu Huichen, the prince of 3 provinces, had appeared. Just as they were thinking about how to deal with this person, Baiming took the initiative to express goodwill and said that they wouldn't amass a large number of troops at the border. This was like someone sending a pillow to Zhu Qizhen when he was sleepy. Zhu Qizhen had no reason to refuse. The Wara's leader, Yes Hen, was also having a headache recently. Because of the terrain, he was currently sandwiched between the forces of Baiming, the five-star army, and the Ili. There was limited space for him to move around, especially when the 50,000 Liaodong Iron Cavalry appeared. They would occasionally find opportunities to attack him, giving him a headache. The Emperor of Baiming suddenly sent an envoy to express goodwill. This was exactly what he wanted, so there was no reason to refuse. Thus, in a short period of time, Zhu Qiu's art of coordination had already reached a certain level. Without the constraints of the southern Ming Empire and the grasslands, he could finally relax and focus on developing his own strength. Thus, he did 2 things in succession. First, increased the support for the Liaodong Iron Cavalry. Relying on the large amount of gold and silver that Baiming Bank had obtained a while ago, he increased the investment in the reserve soldiers of the Liaodong Iron Cavalry. This was to achieve a truly strong army in a short period of time. Second, they could send someone to cross the sea to contact Ashikaga Yoshimasa and express their willingness to send troops to help. While disrupting Yang Qindong's plan to conquer the Japanese Empire, they could also obtain sufficient benefits for themselves. In Zhu Qiu's eyes, he had never taken the Japanese Empire seriously. In his view, it was just a small island country. Although the population was not small, after all, they had only lived on the island for generations. Whether it was the background or vision, they were too far away from him. Such a country could not have any great prospects, let alone pose any threat to the great Ming dynasty. If it wasn't for Yang Qindong setting his target here, he wouldn't have bothered to intervene in this matter. Those who weren't from the future naturally didn't know the future potential of the Japanese Empire, as well as the powerful ambitions in their hearts. It wasn't wrong to say that Zhu Qiu had such thoughts, but Yang Qindong also had his own insistence. He knew the situation in the future. This time, since he had taken action, he had no intention of letting the Japanese Empire go. Not to mention, if he wanted to unify the world, this was also a place where he had to fight. After the eunuch sent by Gao Rang secretly rowed the boat to the island, he soon saw Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who was a little anxious. Although the Supreme General had already reached a certain agreement with Yang Qindong, he was surprised to find that those people were not easy to deal with when he went back to deal with the opposing forces in the country. They were not as easy to deal with as he had imagined. It was just like Hirai Ida and Hokuru Island. Although the Supreme General had twice the military strength of Hirai Ida, the Supreme General was not as easy to deal with as he had expected. Instead, the Supreme General was gradually in a stalemate with Hirai Ida and Hokuru Island. Of course, Ashikaga Yoshimasa didn't know that although Yang Qindong couldn't send troops to help the flat well field on the surface in private, he had taken out a lot of money to support the other side. The most important thing for soldiers to fight was to be paid. This was the main reason why ordinary people were attracted to join the army. With enough money, more people could be attracted to join the army, and more people would be encouraged to perform better on the battlefield. This was the so-called people die for wealth. It was precisely because of the wealth in their hands that the flat well field's control over the army became stronger. At the same time, under the stimulation of money, the soldiers also showed their potential and performed better on the battlefield. As if he had returned to his teenage years, Hirai Ida's strength had greatly increased. Although there was not much change in his military strength due to certain reasons, the increase in his combat power still brought a lot of trouble to his opponent, Ashikaga Yoshimasa. He had an army of 300,000 that was twice his size, but they had not made much progress even after a month of hard fighting. Instead, they had suffered heavy losses and their strength had been greatly reduced. This result was naturally not what Ashikaga Yoshimasa wanted to see. However, facing the flat well field army that seemed to have completely changed, he really didn't have any better ideas. Especially when he found out that Yang Qindong's 5-star army had completed more than 70% of the reconstruction work. In other words, he felt a sense of danger when he saw that Yang Qindong's 5-star army was about to pull out of trouble. It was at this time that the eunuch envoy sent by Baiming arrived. This also gave Ashikaga Yoshimasa new hope. The two sides met in secret and talked for a full day and night. Finally, they reached a series of agreements. When he walked out of the tent the next day, Ashikaga Yoshimasa's face had already changed from a dispirited look to a radiant one. History had also changed at this moment. At least in his own tent, Yang Qindong was stunned for a long time when he received the news from the intelligence department. Young Master, Ashikaga Yoshimasa suddenly announced that the Japanese Empire has become an island of Baiming and is an inseparable part of it. Regarding this matter, Baiming's envoy also took out the imperial edict personally written by the acting emperor and announced it to the public. When Beta Persei said this, he was also confused. He didn't know how this trick was done, but he could also understand one thing. That is, the situation has changed. For the 5-star army, for the young master, this is not a good thing. This is of course not a good thing. Ashikaga Yoshimasa suddenly hugged Baiming's thigh, which is equivalent to becoming full of confidence. One must know that in that era the great Ming dynasty was still very famous. At least in the eyes of the Japanese Empire, it was a very powerful country. It was an existence that they couldn't provoke and couldn't afford to provoke. With this in mind, Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who had the support of Baiming, naturally had more confidence and trump cards. He was afraid that he would soon put great pressure on the forces opposing him in the flat well field. The situation of the war would also change. Of course, the pressure that brought Yang Qindong was that Baiming suddenly made a move and fully supported Ashikaga Yoshimasa. In this way, it would undoubtedly be much more difficult for him to send troops to occupy this place. This is because once Yang Qindong continues to use force, it would be tantamount to becoming an enemy of Baiming. At least until now, he had not fully prepared himself in this regard. Investigate again. Yang Chendong, who said this to Beta Persei, sat in the chair and slowly closed his eyes. Not fully prepared mentally in this regard did not mean that he was not prepared. For example, after several years of development, and after investing a huge amount of money and material resources, the first city was already self-sufficient. This was also Yang Chendong's preparation for the possibility that Baiming might suddenly cut off his transportation line. The origin city might be barely self-sufficient, but in the far eastern region of the Siberia region, the supplies there were still very scarce. If this line of communication was cut off now, the impact on that region would be very great. Considering that the great Ming dynasty's genie guards could be said to be everywhere, Yang Chendong believed that Zhu Qiu should be aware of the army he sent to Siberia. This was why he played such a trick in order to curb the development of the five-star army. It could even be regarded as a warning. Zhu Qiu's move really made Yang Chendong very uncomfortable. The best way he could do now was to retreat. For example, withdraw from the Japanese Empire and return the territory he had previously occupied in order to show goodwill to Baiming and keep the transportation line unblocked. After solving these problems in the future and having the strength to compete with Baiming, he would send troops to the Japanese Empire. Yang Xie's development seemed to be very fast, and the progress was very smooth. However, in the end, their foundation was still too weak, especially with the rapid expansion plans, so many occupied places were not safe. From time to time, civil strife would break out in some areas and provinces, and it would take some effort to pacify them. Internal stability was a big problem, and the lack of military strength also gave Yang Chendong quite a headache. Considering the elite route, considering that the morale of the people was not very stable, and the expansion of the troops was also a problem, the size of the five-star army had always been small. Although the five-star army had been expanding again and again, especially the appearance of the foreign coalition army, it was still too small compared to Baiming, who already had 4 million soldiers. It was precisely because of this lack of manpower that Baiming saw the opportunity and dared to jump out at this time to help Ashikaga Yoshimasa and take the opportunity to suppress him. Of course, in addition to retreating, Yang Chendong had another way, and that was to continue to do things his own way and continue to attack the Japanese Empire with the risk of falling out with Baiming. Moreover, Baiming without the navy could only help the Japanese Empire with limited help. It was just that in this way the pressure on him would be too great. It was possible that the transportation line would be cut off, and even Shirkai would become an isolated city in an instant, and it might be besieged by the Baiming army at any time. There was a saying that went, "For small gains lose big gains." If he made the second choice, the result might be like this. Then it was better to choose the first choice, recharge his strength and wait for the next battle when his wings were full. If it was anyone else, they would probably choose the second choice. Even if there was any reluctance, they would have to give up all the benefits in front of them. But this matter fell on Yang Chendong's head, and he really wanted to take the risk. Someone call Wang Shan over. After closing his eyes for a long time, Yang Chendong suddenly opened his eyes again, and his voice was clearly heard. Soon, the exclusive telegrapher Wang Shan came to Yang Chendong's tent with the radio station. Chapter 1086. Ashikaga Yoshimasa had suddenly become a member of the Baiming imperial court. Even though the current Baiming imperial court was not as glorious as the Ming dynasty, it still put a lot of pressure on the other warlords of the Japanese Empire. Some of the smaller factions of the Japanese Empire who had wanted to send troops to harass the Supreme General hesitated and decided to bide their time. Using this opportunity, Ashikaga Yoshimasa sent out the eloquent and resourceful Nishi Toshihide to various places to put pressure on them and express his goodwill. He said that as long as they were willing to turn over a new leaf, he would let bygones be bygones. He would even consider fighting for more benefits for everyone when the new country was established. Once the promise was made, coupled with Nishi Toshihide's ability, many people responded quickly. It was still the same old saying that benefits were the only thing that would never change. In the face of benefits, the previous dirty deeds were nothing at all. In just 10 days, 7 small and medium-sized forces expressed their intention to attach themselves to Ashikaga Yoshimasa. These people added up to about 15,000 people. Although the number of people didn't seem to be a lot, the beginning was always the hardest. Once there was a good start, the following matters would be much easier to handle. Another 10 days passed, and another 30,000 people changed their allegiance. They went from being opposed to Ashikaga Yoshimasa to supporting him. Not only that, but 10,000 of these 30,000 people were originally allies of the Flat Well Field. With this change in attitude, the flat well field was facing a crisis. When the factions weren't as united as one, Supreme General Ashikaga Yoshimasa took this opportunity to launch a counterattack. He attacked the Hokuriku province, and 5 days later he took over the Hokuriku province's Ekizan prefecture and headed straight for the flat well field's headquarters, Yuecheng prefecture. 2 months had passed since Yang Qindong took over the jurisdiction of the Shanyang Path. The migration of the people had been completed, and the people transferred from other provinces were trying their best to integrate into the environment and climate. In half a month, the land distribution would be completed. When that time came, if someone came and wanted to reoccupy the land, even if Yang Qindong agreed, the people who had received the land would not agree. Yang Qindong had already made a decision about Baiming's interference in the Japanese Empire. He didn't choose to back down, and instead he chose to face. Firstly, the current chaos in the Japanese Empire was the best opportunity for him to make a move. If he backed out now, he didn't know when such a good opportunity would appear again. Secondly, compared to his own goal, Yang Qindong's time was tight. It wasn't hard to imagine. He definitely wouldn't allow his limited time to waste on the Japanese Empire. So what if it was Baiming? If it was a confrontation, then so be it. He was no longer the great Ming dynasty, and even if he was, he wouldn't be afraid with the advantage of Okura. Speaking of Okura's advantage, Yang Qindong had already sent a telegram to the Army Command Headquarters. He ordered the Deputy Commander Lung Song to send the 4th Division of the 1st Army and the 7th Division of the 2nd Army from Southeast Asia to the Japanese Empire using transport ships. This time, not only were they using 2 firearms, but they were also using a lot of cannons. Yang Qindong was ruthless. If Ashikaga Yoshimasa resisted too fiercely, he wouldn't mind using cannons to teach him a lesson. In short, this time he would definitely destroy the Japanese Empire. Before this, Yang Qindong first contacted Tiger's Mane, Yumian, and the others in the first city. He directly told them that once he continued to make a move in the Japanese Empire, it was very likely that Baiming would cut off the transportation line. At that time, the other party wouldn't be able to be self-sufficient while also ensuring the basic supply of supplies to the Far East. The first city had only been built for a few years. It was already very difficult to be self-sufficient without the support of Chichen City. Now they still had to provide help to the Far East. Although it was only a basic supply, the pressure was still not small. In this regard, Yang Qindong didn't have too many expectations. However, to his surprise, after some discussion, Tiger's Mane and Yumian quickly replied that there was no problem. When they made this answer, only God knew how much pressure they were under. When Yang Qindong received the reply, he was excited. At the same time, he asked Wang Shan to call back and thank Tiger's Mane and Yumian for their sacrifice for the overall situation. At the same time, he would solve the matter of the Japanese Empire as soon as possible and reopen the transportation line. Not to mention that Yang Qindong was making all kinds of preparations and efforts. Ashikaga Yoshimasa was also not idle. After receiving the support of Baiming, he seemed to have become the embodiment of justice and the orthodox existence. More and more forces had joined him, and many of the middle forces were wavering. It could be seen that it wouldn't be long before these people would also choose him. This directly caused a lot of pressure on Shuichi Hirata. Their original allies had either rebelled or wavered. In any case, it was impossible to count on them to contribute any more. The original army of 150,000 people had been reduced to less than 100,000 people. Ashikaga Yoshimasa also began to sound the horn of attack. It seemed that he wanted to take advantage of the situation to settle the situation. The reason why Ashikaga Yoshimasa was so confident was because of Kobayakawa's secret surrender. Kobayakawa was a force with nearly 20,000 soldiers. With his strength, he was worthy of being called a big name. Initially, he didn't like Ashikaga Yoshimasa, or perhaps he wanted to use this opportunity to gain benefits. That was why he formed an alliance with the so-called like-minded Flat Well Field, causing quite a lot of trouble for his opponents. After Zhu Qiu's move, Ashikaga Yoshimasa's confidence began to increase, and it also changed Kobayakawa's mind. Especially after secretly meeting Nishidaxu, the balance in his heart finally changed. Nishidaxu was a very smart person. This time, not only did he want Kobayakawa to be his pawn, he also asked him not to announce his surrender. He wanted him to be prepared to deal a heavy blow to the Flat Well Field at the crucial moment. This was to prove that he had joined the great general's camp. Kobayakawa, of course, would not refuse. He agreed immediately and began to wait for the opportunity. When he finally saw the great general's attack, He knew that he was about to be put to good use. He secretly mobilized his troops and was prepared to attack the flat well field at any time. But at this time a piece of news came that made him hesitate. In just 3 days, 6 leaders of the Japanese Empire who had defected to Ashikaga Yoshimasa's forces were secretly assassinated. After the incident there was no clue at all. The identity of the murderer became a mystery, making the situation that seemed very clear become blurred again. The sudden assassination plan made Kobayakawa, who was prepared to take action, hesitate. His many years of experience told him that this matter was strange. If he didn't understand what was going on, he might regret it for the rest of his life if he made a decision casually. There were many people who had the same idea as Kobayakawa. After all, 6 people died in 3 days. If it was a coincidence, no one would believe it. Then the question was, why did they die? Why were they killed so quietly? Considering that these 6 people were born in different places, had different levels of power and influence, and were quite different in age, they all had one thing in common, which was that they had all opposed Ashikaga Yoshimasa. Now they had changed to support him, which was very scary. Could it be that their action of going back on their words angered someone? From the looks of it, to be able to kill 6 people without leaving any evidence behind, just this point alone was not something an ordinary person could do. Could it be the flat well field? After all, this person had stayed by the side of the emperor. More importantly, he was born in a ninja family. With such an inheritance, it was not strange that he could do such a thing. But could it really be him? Was he trying to warn others? The flat well field, who was being speculated by everyone, was also secretly sad at this moment in Echu Prefecture of Hokuriku. The assassination was really not his doing. It was true that he was born in a ninja family, but no one knew better than him that the ninja masters of his family had long withered. The only one they could rely on was Kobayakawa, who always protected him. How could Flat Well Field, who no longer had the ability to threaten others and could only defend himself, do such a thing? For this reason he specially called Kobayakawa to ask him about this matter. Kobayakawa, could it be someone who has a very good relationship with our family, or your former friends who couldn't stand it? No. After a little hesitation, Kobayakawa gave an answer. As if he found that Flat Well Field didn't believe it, he replied with a solemn face. If only 1 or 2 people died it might be possible, but 6 people died at once. This is a bit unbelievable. You know, the ninja power of our family has long been declining. Even if they wanted to do it, I'm afraid they don't have the ability to do it. Kobayakawa's answer completely cut off Flat Well Field's idea. He sighed and said, then who could it be? General, it shouldn't be the work of the Japanese Empire. Most of the ninja forces are now in the hands of Ashikaga Yoshimasa. He wouldn't do such a thing, and because of his existence no one in the Japanese Empire has the strength and courage to do such a thing. So, listening to Kobayakawa's analysis, Flat Well Field felt that he had grasped something. So you said that it's not the work of the Japanese Empire? Could it be Bugnam of Gojoseon? It's Bugnam of Gojoseon, it must be him. Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who was in Hokuriku's Ekizen Prefecture, was roaring angrily in a large courtyard that he had just occupied not long ago. At first, like everyone else, he thought that the killer was Flat Well Field, who asked him to be his biggest enemy now, and at the same time he also had a ninja background. But when he also called Matsumoto Kazuma, who was in charge of the ninja department, he ruled out the possibility that Flat Well Field was behind the scenes, and finally set the target on Yang Qindong. Chapter 1087. To be honest, after the eunuch sent by the Emperor of Baiming announced the imperial edict, Ashikaga Yoshimasa had been waiting for Yang Qindong to negotiate with him. In his opinion, since the master behind him had already spoken, how could a mere king with a different surname not know when to advance or retreat? Then shouldn't he return the Shanyang path and even give up the Shihai path that he first occupied? Yang Qindong was a king with a different surname, and he was a king with a different surname with some strength. But so what? In Ashikaga Yoshimasa's eyes, since the Emperor of Baiming had spoken, even the most powerful subjects had to back down. The imperial power of the great Ming dynasty was supreme, and he had never heard of a subject who dared to openly oppose it. Even if they wanted to rebel, they would have to think of all kinds of reasons and then act in the name of protecting the king. This was the impression that the Han people had left on Ashikaga Yoshimasa. In a country that always followed morals and paid attention to propriety, justice, integrity, and shame, it was very difficult for a great hero to appear. Even if one appeared by chance, if he didn't follow the rules, it wouldn't take long for those who envied him to gang up and kill him. He had almost forgotten about the five-star army that he no longer regarded as a match for. However, the sudden assassination of 6 people made him understand that this Bugnam of Gojoseon didn't seem to be afraid of the imperial power of the great Ming dynasty. At least, he was far more confident than he had imagined. When the result came out, even Ashikaga Yoshimasa was shocked. Could it be that he had to compete with this King Wunan of Daimyeon? Of course, Ashikaga Yoshimasa wasn't afraid. After all, this was the territory of the Japanese Empire, and he had the support and recognition of the Emperor of Beiming. His military strength and provisions were many times more than the five-star army, so there was no reason for him to be afraid. If he had to say something, then it was to prevent the other party from assassinating him. After all, this kind of method could be used to deal with others, but who could guarantee that it wouldn't be used to deal with him? Kun Matsumoto, I will have to trouble you next, please show your strength. If someone really dares to make a move against this great general, let them know that there are still the most powerful ninjas in the Japanese Empire. Since he had been praised, Matsumoto Kazuma really didn't have a reason to refuse. Not to mention that the ninjas behind him had to rely on the great general. After all, ninjas were born with martial arts first priority, first, second, and ignored other things like how they had to deal with ordinary people, how to deal with ordinary people, and how to accumulate enough money to pay enough money for training and daily expenses. Now that the great general had spoken, Matsumoto Kazuma immediately nodded and said, "Hai, please rest assured there will be no mistakes in your safety." Yoshi, Ashikaga Yoshimasa nodded with satisfaction, then turned his attention to how to deal with the opposing forces in the flat well field. In his opinion, this was the most urgent thing to solve. As for the 6 people who were killed, they were just some nameless pawns, and they couldn't change the overall situation. After he calmed down the civil strife in the Japanese Empire, the five-star army, as an outsider, would no longer need to stay here, so they would have to leave. It was naturally Yang Qindong's idea to kill them, and it was the Wolf Fang Special Forces that did it. When this Wolf Fang Special Forces was first established, they were set to complete beheadings and various other urgent tasks. However, killing 6 unsuspecting leaders of the Japanese Empire didn't take much effort. Coupled with the complete information from the intelligence department, it wasn't as simple as killing chickens, but in short, it wasn't that difficult. Today the five-star army was still stabilizing the Nankado area. Yang Qindong knew very well that without a stable rear, once they fought with the enemy, it would be a terrible thing, so the army couldn't move yet. Even so, the Wolf Fang Special Forces and the Ghost Shadow Assault Team came in handy at this moment. Continue to issue orders to them, let Wolf Fang and Ghost Shadow cooperate well and make them stand out. Sigh, we still don't have enough people. Yang Qindong sighed and said to Beta Persei beside him. Beta Persei liked to see the young master's domineering aura. After he laughed, he went out to find the reporter Wang Shan. A new bloody storm unfolded one by one in the following time. After the 6 people were killed, on the 4th day 2 more leaders who publicly supported Ashikaga Yoshimasa were killed. On the 5th day 3 people were killed, and on the 6th day 2 more people were killed. When the news continued to spread, not only did the forces who had originally said that they would stand up to support Ashikaga Yoshimasa stop all their actions, but some of the forces who had publicly supported Ashikaga Yoshimasa actually shouted slogans against it. But they just shouted. They didn't mean to attack the forces of the great general. Instead, after shouting, they went into hiding like a turtle. Smart people could see at a glance that they were just doing this to save their lives. It was just a gesture. But this gesture was enough to give Ashikaga Yoshimasa a headache. The deaths of those people were like slaps to his face, which made him feel ashamed and furious at the same time. They're going too far. Kun Matsumoto, please send experts to check how those people died. I really don't understand. Don't they know how to be vigilant? While cursing Yang Qindong's unscrupulous actions, Ashikaga Yoshimasa also hated those dead people. They didn't even have the strength to protect themselves. They really deserved to be killed. Ashikaga Yoshimasa was angry. He thought that he must find out the reason and then give a firm counterattack, because this is a serious provocation to him, the great general. Matsumoto Kazuma moved quickly. 3 days later he returned to Ashikaga Yoshimasa with the results. He had already seen the bodies of the dead, so it was easy for him to find the gunshot wounds and the bullets that had entered their bodies. Oh, so they were killed by firearms from a distance? Listening to the report, Ashikaga Yoshimasa asked with some surprise. Yes. I have long heard that the firearms in the five-star army are very advanced. Now it seems to be true. Matsumoto Kazuma nodded and admitted. The facts were in front of him. Ashikaga Yoshimasa's heart also gave birth to a trace of fear. After all, the unknown was the scariest. What if the five-star army used the same method on him? What should he do? Would he be able to defend himself? Just as his face was constantly changing and uncertain, Matsumoto Kazuma on the side seemed to have seen something. He reported again and added, "I have brought people to see it, and I have also done a professional investigation. The effective range of this firearm should be very far, but it is only about 600 meters. When these people died, the guards around them were concentrated on the periphery, which gave the shooter a chance. And if we can arrange more people to protect the Supreme General when you go out, and at the same time, the safe search range is 600 meters away, then no one can hurt the Supreme General, and these assassins sent by the five-star army will not be able to succeed." This answer was exactly what Ashikaga Yoshimasa wanted to hear. After seeing that Matsumoto Kazuma had a specific arrangement, he smiled with satisfaction and said, "Very good, I am happy to have a captain like you. It's just that some people must be punished when they make a mistake. Since you know what is done, then Kun Matsumoto should know what to do next." Matsumoto Kazuma quickly understood the meaning of Ashikaga Yoshimasa's words, and immediately replied, "Supreme General, don't worry, I will arrange for the best ninjas to be dispatched, and we will definitely give the five-star army a good lesson." For this result, Ashikaga Yoshimasa was very satisfied. He reached out and patted Matsumoto Kazuma's shoulder to show his affection. But what they didn't know was that the so-called musket could only shoot up to 600 meters away. This inference was correct. From this point of view, Matsumoto Fuma and his ninjas were quite capable. But the reason why the sniper rifle could shoot at such a close range was because it was a trap set by Taihu. The bullets were not shot from the sniper rifle, but from the ordinary Type 95. This was done to create an illusion and make them slack in their defense. Of course, this was a matter for the future. For now, they were preparing to take revenge on the five-star army. Under Matsumoto Kazuma's personal selection, Kitamura, Yui Suzuki, and Kazuma were selected to be the hidden ninjas of the Mountain Sun Path. Ninjas were also divided into different levels. From bottom to top, they were trainee ninja, genin, chunin, jonin, and special ninja. Sending out 3 special ninjas at once was already the limit of what Matsumoto Kazuma could send out. This was because he only had 4 special ninjas on his side, including himself. This time, other than himself, the other 3 special ninjas were sent out. Only the 3 special ninjas were sent out, and there were no other ninjas to assist. Matsumoto Kazuma wanted to achieve the goal of being silent. He didn't want to send out too many people and leak the location of the ninjas. The 3 special ninjas were sent out in secret. Even with Yang Xie's intelligence department, they couldn't find any traces, but the relevant defensive measures had already been taken. After Yang Qindong sent out Wolf Fong and Ghost Shadow, he was prepared for a counterattack. The reason why his subordinates couldn't find anything was because the person who came was too strong. But this kind of strength might affect others, but it was nothing to Yang Qindong. Ever since Yang Qindong came to this era, not only did he have the help of the mysterious Daikara, but his strength was also constantly rising. Especially as Yang Xie's forces grew bigger and bigger, after he made a request, some famous martial artists were found and sent to Yang Qindong. After talking with these people, Yang Qindong's strength was also constantly rising, and he had already touched the threshold of half-step Grandmaster. Chapter 1088. At this time, Yang Qindong's perception of the outside world was more sensitive than before, especially his perception of danger. That kind of wonderful feeling could not be described with words. That wasn't the only aspect of his improvement. The strength and speed of his attacks had also improved by quite a bit. At the very least, when he fought with Yang Air and the other dragon guards, he was much more relaxed. Often, the moment he attacked, the dragon guards, who were known to be 1 in 1,000, would be unknowingly knocked to the ground. With such an improvement in personal strength, Yang Qindong was not only not afraid of the possible revenge of Ashikaga Yoshimasa, but also had a sense of eagerness. Another 10 days had passed, and the settlement of the Yang people in the Shanyang Path was finally completed. The non-human people who were sent over from the various provinces were allocated to their own fields according to their population. Some businesses had also started to be established, and things that were closely related to the people such as grain stores and salt stores were also opened one after another. This had greatly stabilized the local situation and the hearts of the people. Not only that, the 4th Division and the 7th Army who were ordered to come had also arrived. After a short day of rest, they could accept the mission and attack the Japanese army at any time. A large number of rice grains were also being transported to the island on the transport ships. Yang Qindong put on the appearance of a protracted war. In fact, the Japanese Empire, which had a population of 12 million, was worth some effort. What Yang Qindong wanted was the population base here. If used well, it would become an excellent reserve warehouse for soldiers, which would solve many of his problems with the source of soldiers. Because of the geographical advantage, the Japanese Empire could be isolated in a corner. No matter what changes happened in the outside world, the development of the Japanese Empire could be carried out in an orderly manner. This could be seen from the fact that they had a population of 12 million although they only had an area of less than 380,000 square kilometers. For example, Siam, which had been occupied by Yang Qindong, had an area of more than 510,000 square kilometers, but in terms of population, it was only 7 to 8 million. Naturally, considering his hatred for this ethnic group, Yang Qindong did not rule out the possibility of using large firearms. Once he was angry, so what if he accepted fewer soldiers? He would teach this ethnic group, who bullied the weak and feared the strong, a lesson and let them know that they were just a small branch of Wuxia. Even if he wanted to take action, he would need a valid reason. After all, the previous peace treaty was still there. Yang Qindong already had a plan for this. He knew how to lead the outbreak of this war, but before he started, there was one more thing he needed to solve, and that was the killer sent by Ashikaga Yoshimasa. Although there was no evidence and there was no information about the other party, Yang Qindong judged others by himself. He believed that Ashikaga Yoshimasa was not a person who was willing to suffer in silence, so the killer should have been sent out long ago. It was just that the action was secretive and had not been discovered. It didn't matter. Wuxia had a long history and it was very famous in the art of war. It had been translated into many languages, and this time Yang Qindong used one of the 36 stratagems to lure the snake out of its hole. Beta Persei, go out for a walk with the young master. Yang Qindong had a relaxed expression as he changed into a loose green robe. Go out for a walk? Beta Persei's expression changed in an instant. He followed Yang Qindong every day, and he knew very well that Ashikaga Yoshimasa could send killers for revenge at any time. It was said that the commanders of the 5-star armies and above had extra protection around them. Then, as the leader and the core of the army, shouldn't Yang Qindong stay in the tent to be safe? Taking the initiative to go out was tantamount to asking for trouble. At this moment, Beta Persei stood still. Beta Persei's behavior was seen by Yang Qindong, but he didn't say anything. Perhaps he had already guessed that this would be the result, so he just smiled and then walked towards another big tent with Junko. Yang Qindong not only wanted to go out for a walk, but also wanted to take Junko with him. Did he really think that the ninjas of the Japanese Empire were vegetarians? Beta Persei panicked and wanted to dissuade him, but just as he moved, Yang Qindong's voice came from the other side. If you want to stop me, then stay in the big tent and guard the base camp. With just this sentence, Beta Persei became hesitant. It seems that Yang Qindong is a very democratic person, and he is willing to listen to everyone's opinions on some issues. In his words, 3 cobblers are better than 1 zhuge liang. This is also one of the reasons why everyone speaks in military and political meetings. Knowing the temper of the 6th young master, everyone has their own opinions, and once a good opinion is adopted, isn't it equal to entering the eyes of the 6th young master? At the same time, Yang Qindong is also stubborn on some things. If he decided on something, it would be very difficult for others to stop him. At the very least, it was not something that Yang Heir alone could do. Thinking that if he can't stop him, even the qualification to follow him will be deprived, Beta Persei obediently closed his mouth, but when Yang Qindong went to call Junko, he called the first guard Captain Chiovi and ordered him to send some of the most elite people to follow the young master. Beta Persei and Chiovi were already prepared, and what happened next was as they guessed. Yang Qindong didn't choose to take too many long way, including Junko, her maid Miko, and Captain Kobayashi. There were only a dozen people in total, including Beta Persei and Captain Chiovi. More than a dozen horses walked out of the barracks unhurriedly from the south to the north. The location chosen by the 5-star army was Misako Prefecture, and a little north from here was Boma Prefecture, which was the border between Shanyang-do and Ping and Beijing. The north of Misako Prefecture belonged to Boki Prefecture and Yinban city of Shanin-do. It was the junction of the 3 places, and usually the public security was somewhat chaotic. Yang Qindong and the others chose a place called Shaoyin Mountain at the junction of the 3 places. It was said that it was warm in winter and cool in summer, and the climate was pleasant and the environment was good. Yang Qindong took Junko out to enjoy the scenery and also to relax during the war. Junko was very happy that Yang Qindong was willing to come out to play with her. She was as lively as a little girl on the horse. After leaving the barracks, her bell-like laughter could be heard all the way, spreading far and wide in the empty mountains. Yang Qindong looked at Junko's performance, and his eyes were full of a doting smile. He seemed to be in a good mood, but no one noticed the caution in his eyes from time to time, and the tension of his muscles. He was in a state where he was ready to go all out at any time. The group of more than a dozen people went all the way. Except for Beta Persei, Chiovi and Kobayashi, the other long way spread out, keeping a distance of dozens of meters away from Yang Qindong and the other corps members to ensure that if there was any danger they could warn them at any time. Although there were few people, the division of labor was clear, and each direction could be guaranteed to have one or two long way, which also greatly enhanced the sense of security. Yang Qindong and the others arrived at the foot of Shaoyin Mountain without any surprises or dangers. Here they saw a spring that was flowing. Because of the geographical and environmental reasons, there were many springs in the Japanese Empire, which directly led to the development of the hot spring industry in the Japanese Empire. Therefore, the appearance of this spring was not unexpected. The moment she saw it, Junko happily got off the horse and came to the spring under the accompaniment of the maid Yoshiko. At this time it was September and the weather was still a little hot at noon. But when they came to the spring, a cool breeze blew on their faces, making Junko smile happily. She didn't forget to ask Yang Qindong to come down from the horse to share this cool breeze with her. Of course, Yang Qindong wouldn't refuse Junko's enthusiasm. He looked around casually, then slowly jumped off the white dragon horse. At the same time, he ordered Beta Persei and Chiovi, "Tell the brothers to rest for a while, don't be so nervous all the time." After the sixth young master spoke, Chiovi waved his hand, and the 10 long way immediately dismounted and found a cool place to rest for a while. At this moment, Yang Qindong also walked towards the spring with steady steps. But at this time, a sword light suddenly flew out from the dense forest in front of the spring. The target was Princess Junko, who was still squatting there with a happy face. The sword light came out of nowhere. It was so sudden that Junko, who was attacked, couldn't help but fall to the ground after letting out a scream. She could only watch as the sword light pierced towards her throat. At this critical moment, the maid Tomiko, who was following beside her, moved. She pulled out a soft sword from her waist and met the sword light head-on. The two collided and saved Tomiko from the butcher's knife. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the captain of the guards, Xiao Lin, had already rushed forward. Along with him was Yang Er, who had pulled out his sword. Even the captain of the Longway First Squad, Chiovi, also brandished his sword. While calling people to protect the sixth young master, he also rushed towards the spring. Yoshiko blocked in time and saved Junko, but she couldn't win. She was stabbed in the shoulder and blood stained her arm. Fortunately, Yang Er and Kobayashi arrived in time and took their places. The two of them fought with the ninja assassins who were dressed in tight black clothes that had suddenly appeared from the left and right. Don't let him escape. Yang Qindong surprisingly didn't rush forward. Instead, under the protection of Tu Longwei, he stood in place and pointed at the ninja of the Japanese Empire. With his order, the other 8 Longwei formed an encirclement under the leadership of Chiovi, firmly surrounding the ninja of the Japanese Empire, cutting off all his escape routes. When things developed to this point, it seemed that everything was going very smoothly. The ninja who appeared looked like he would be captured if he didn't die. There was no way out. Especially under the full counterattack of Beta Persei and Kobayashi, the two of them gradually gained the upper hand. Chapter 1089. Whoosh. Just when everyone's attention was focused on the spring, another sword light suddenly appeared. Unexpectedly, it went straight for Yang Qindong, who was standing 30 meters away from the spring. The appearance of the sword light did indeed catch everyone off guard. At least the two Longwei who were protecting Yang Qindong were not fully prepared. Just a moment ago their eyes were still on the spring. Who would have thought that a new sword light would appear and the target would be them? However, no matter how sudden the sword light was, the two Longwei instinctively blocked in front of Yang Qindong with their swords. They only had one goal. Even if they had to die, they could not let the sixth young master get hurt. Otherwise they did not deserve to be a member of the Longwei. Get out of the way. The two Longwei instinctively wanted to use their bodies to block the sixth young master and complete their mission. Because of their panic, they were a little unsteady and exposed a flaw in their defense. Yang Qindong, who was protected behind them, saw this scene clearly. So at the critical moment he shouted and pushed the two Long Wei who were blocking in front of him gently with his palms. This push made the two of them walk around the gates of hell. At the last moment they did not use their bodies as shields. However, while Yang Qindong saved the two Long Wei, he also exposed himself to the sword light. He watched as the cold sword essence pierced towards his throat. Qiu Vi, who had already turned his attention to this dangerous scene, saw it. He was so nervous that his heart almost jumped out of his chest. If anything happened to the sixth young master, even if he was only slightly injured, he would not be able to atone for his sins. And once he was stabbed by this sword, he was afraid that it would not be as simple as a small injury. If something really happened to him, he would become Yang Xie's sinner. Thinking of this, Qiu Vi shouted and desperately rushed forward. He only hoped that the sixth young master's injury would be less serious, so that even if he died, he could die with a smile on his face. Everyone was stunned, and Junko, who had been rescued, cried out in alarm. The sword was getting closer and closer to Yang Qindong's throat, and there was no way to dodge it. Yang Qindong looked very calm in the face of this fatal sword strike. There was no trace of panic in his eyes. When the sword was less than half a fist away from his throat, he suddenly jumped up and retreated, as if he had been pulled by a wire and was shooting a movie. The ninja who attacked didn't expect such a result. He was even prepared that Yang Qindong would dodge, and if his first attack failed he would make the second attack. But he didn't expect that this person could retreat in the air. This was many times more difficult than moving in the air. At least with his strength he could not do this. The ninja of the Japanese Empire was chasing, and Yang Qindong was retreating. The two of them were in a stalemate. Seeing this scene, Qiu Vi breathed a sigh of relief. At the same time he also accelerated his pace. He wanted to catch up and then give a fatal blow to the ninja of the Japanese Empire. Qiu Vi was still running forward with all his strength. There were 6 Long Wei beside him. They were also chasing with all their strength. They wanted to save the sixth young master. However, the third sword light that followed completely disrupted their plans. No one knew when the third ninja appeared, but he successfully blocked Qiu Vi's group of 7. Not only that, when he suddenly appeared he also injured 2 Long Wei who were trying to catch up to Yang Qindong. The appearance of the third ninja of the Japanese Empire was like the appearance of a dangerous mountain pass. He blocked Qiu Vi's group who wanted to save them. This was equivalent to cutting off all of Yang Qindong's support. 3 special ninjas, this was the strongest lineup of assassins under the Ashikaga Yoshimasa organization. Except for the captain and the boss, Matsumoto Kazuma, who didn't appear, the other 3 all appeared. The first one to attack was Kitamura, the second one to attack Yang Qindong was the strongest of the 3, and the last one to block Qiu Vi's group was Suzuki Yui. The 3 of them worked together and appeared without any warning. Even if they wanted to assassinate Ashikaga Yoshimasa, they had at least a 70% chance of success. And that was under the condition that the other party had a tight defense. Not to mention that Yang Qindong only had a dozen people around him. In their opinion, their target was dead for sure. Yang Qindong kept dodging. He looked a little embarrassed, but he always managed to dodge the sharp sword at the last moment. This was the real Yang Qindong. Maybe because his dodging posture wasn't very good, or maybe because the plan was going very smoothly, no one noticed why they still haven't killed the target after so long. The 3 special ninjas were completely immersed in the joy of being able to make a great contribution. On the other hand, Yang Qindong looked very flustered from the beginning to the end, but if one observed carefully, one would notice that he didn't counterattack at all. All of his actions looked very flustered, but it was also very strange. For example, why didn't he rush forward when he saw Junko being assassinated? Why did he just stand there? For example, why didn't he counterattack when he was being assassinated? Was he really only dodging? According to human instinct, he should at least draw his sword and fight back. Yang Qindong didn't do anything, he just kept dodging and looking around. Yes, Yang Qindong was using this opportunity to observe everything around him. Before he could confirm whether there were only 3 assassins or not, and whether there were other backup plans, he wouldn't act rashly. The reason was that he didn't want to alert the enemy. This was where Yang Qindong's confidence came from. He had already touched the threshold of the supreme power realm. That was the reason why he still walked out of the military camp with Junko, even though he knew that Ashikaga Yoshimasa would probably do the same to him after he sent someone to assassinate Junko. Some methods were not only used by him, others could also learn and use them. In order not to let the officers under his command become the target of Ashikaga Yoshimasa's anger, Yang Qindong stepped forward bravely and used himself as the bait. Everything was as he expected. The appearance of the three special ninjas was satisfactory, otherwise Yang Qindong would really have to worry about the safety of the low-level officers. Now that the assassins had appeared, what he needed to do was to determine whether there were other enemies around. With his five senses, which had already touched the threshold of a Grand Master, it was easy for him to get a clear picture of the situation nearby. After confirming that he did not sense any new auras, he was basically certain that only the three killers had come. Haha. Yang Qindong, who was constantly dodging, suddenly smiled. This Ashikaga Yoshimasa was still very confident. Did he really think that only three ninjas could hurt him? At this moment he was laughing at the opponent's arrogance and presumption. But this kind of smile was seen by Blowing Ishida, who was holding a ninja sword, and it gave him a bad feeling. Instinctively he shouted, "Baka. Fuck you." Yang Qindong quickly replied. Then, without knowing when, a gun appeared in his right hand. He even made a shooting gesture towards Yoshimasa. Although he didn't know how powerful this gun was, Yoshimasa already knew the power of firearms from the information he received from the five-star army. When he saw the gun being taken out, his body instinctively stopped, and he even made a dodging gesture. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Yang Qindong fired a shot into the sky. Immediately, a red light appeared. It was the appearance of a signal flare. Yang Qindong took this opportunity to send out a signal of his location. He knew that there were people who wanted to harm him, so how could he not be prepared? There were 200 people from the Wolf Fang Special Forces waiting near Shaoyin Mountain, but because they were afraid of being discovered by the assassins, they hid far away. The signal was sent out in order to prevent these three people from escaping. Since they wanted to kill him, then they should be prepared to be killed. Of course, Yang Qindong wouldn't really kill them because they were far more convincing dead than alive. This was also one of the reasons why Yang Qindong didn't take out his gun to kill them. He wanted to keep them alive. The other reason was that Yang Qindong also wanted to test his own understanding of martial arts. Although he had Beta Persei and Long Way to practice, they were still his own people. He couldn't be ruthless. How could he have such an opportunity? It would be more satisfying to have a good enemy as a target. He put the signal flare back on his waist. At this moment Yang Qindong's aura changed. When he looked at Yoshimasa, there was a hint of mockery in his eyes. He even made a beckoning gesture with his finger. His provocation was very strong. 8. Seeing that Yang Qindong was ignoring him, Yoshimasa was angry. After cursing, he suddenly rushed forward. At this moment he perfectly used the advantage of a ninja's speed. He covered a distance of 3 or 4 meters in one step, instantly closing the distance between him and Yang Qindong. Yoshimasa was fast enough, but Yang Qindong's reaction was even faster. His body had already changed when the other party cursed. When the sword pierced through, it naturally pierced nothing. Then he felt a pain in his left shoulder and couldn't help but grimace. Yang Qindong finally started to fight back. He patted Yoshimasa's shoulder. It seemed that he didn't use much strength, just a light pat, but Yoshimasa knew that his shoulder was broken. This is the difference between hard skills and internal strength. It can also be said to be the difference between external strength and internal strength. At Yang Qindong's level, although he couldn't use a branch as a sword to fight against all things, he could still turn his strength into internal strength and hit it out. Chapter 1090. Fortunately, he was a ninja and a very good one at that. He could endure pain that normal people couldn't, so he didn't cry out in pain. Instead, he endured the pain and continued to swing his sword. He wanted to kill Yang Qindong to avenge his broken arm. Even when he was in perfect condition, he couldn't hurt Yang Qindong at all. Not to mention he was suffering from internal injuries, so it was impossible for him to hurt Yang Qindong. Next, Yang Qindong kept drawing his sword, thrusting his sword, swinging his sword, chopping his sword, and picking up his sword. Yang Qindong just waited until the moment when the sword light appeared and casually dodged it. From time to time he would hit forward. But even so, after more than a dozen rounds, his whole body was trembling. This wasn't because of anger but because of pain. After 7 to 8 hits, each hit would leave a heavy injury on his body. And this was because Yang Qindong didn't want to kill and wanted to keep him alive. Otherwise, even if he had 3 lives, he wouldn't be able to survive. Clang! The ninja sword fell to the ground without any warning when Yang Qindong hit his right arm again. As the sword fell to the ground, Wuxia also knelt on the ground. At this moment he felt that his whole body was falling apart. Every movement required a lot of effort and strength. In this state, even if he was facing a normal 5-star army soldier, let alone Yang Qindong who was half a grandmaster, he wouldn't be able to kill him. Wuxia knelt on the ground and Yang Qindong didn't even look at him. He walked past him with an indifferent expression and headed towards Yu Suzuki, who was blocking Cho Wu and the others. Although Yu Suzuki's back was facing Yang Qindong most of the time, his ninja's sharp senses allowed him to observe the situation from time to time. So much time had passed. He really wanted to angrily scold Blowing Rock. Why hadn't they taken care of the target yet? What were they doing? But before he could say anything, Hai Shia suddenly knelt on the ground. Yang Qindong also walked past him. Yu Suzuki knew that Kurosawa did not complete the mission, but he did not have the time to think about the reasons. A glimmer of light appeared in his eyes. Upon closer inspection, there was even a hint of excitement because the target was walking towards him. Didn't that mean that his opportunity to make a great contribution had arrived? Among the 3 people who came, Blowing Stone's strength was the strongest. But in truth, the 3 of them were on par with each other in terms of strength. Ishida was just more proficient in quick attacks, while Yu Suzuki was more proficient in strength. Ninjas were particular about sudden appearance, killing with one blow and then leaving in a huff. The requirement for strength had never been high, which was why Suzuki was slightly weaker than the others. But he had never thought of it that way. In his mind, having more strength would give him an advantage in many aspects. For example, if both of them attacked with the same sword, the one with more strength would obviously have the advantage. This was also the reason why he did not want to submit to Blowing Stone. He always thought that if he chose to be a samurai he would definitely be much stronger than Blowing Stone. But in some things just thinking was not enough. One needed to prove everything with facts. In Yui Suzuki's eyes, Yang Qindong's approach was an opportunity to prove herself. He suppressed the excitement in his heart and acted as if he was still fighting with Chiu Vi and the others. He acted as if he did not notice Yang Qindong's approach and left his back to him. Closer. 10 steps, 8 steps, 5 steps, 3 steps. When he was only 3 steps away, Yu Suzuki suddenly turned around and slashed with his ninja sword. Under the support of his powerful strength, the sound of wind whistling could be heard. At this moment, Yu Suzuki was confident that even if there was a tree in front of him, he would be able to cut it in half. You're courting death. Yu Suzuki suddenly gave up on him and the others and attacked the 6th young master, causing Chiu Vi and the other Longwei members to shout. They shouted and slashed at Yu Suzuki's back. Yu Suzuki acted as if he did not hear them. In the eyes of a ninja, there was only the mission. As long as the assassination mission was completed, what was a little injury? On the contrary, it was a military medal that could be used to prove one's strength. With excitement in his eyes, the ninja sword slashed across Yang Qindong's neck. At this moment, Yu Suzuki's face revealed a smile. It was the excitement and joy of completing the mission, but more than that, it was the joy of proving one's strength. The sword flashed and slashed across Yang Qindong's neck. This scene also shocked Chiu Vi and the others who were rushing over. The 6th young master had actually been injured under their protection right under their noses. Based on this alone, their lives as dragon guards had come to an end. From now on, not only would they no longer be envied by others, but they would also have to live with shame for the rest of their lives. This was something they did not want to see. At this moment they only wanted to kill Yu Suzuki, so what if they had to pay with their lives? At least they could use their deaths to prove their loyalty. Several blades slashed at him from behind, and Yu Suzuki was already prepared to dodge. After all, he was a ninja and his reaction speed had always been very fast. But what happened next made him stop for a moment. And it was this moment that gave Chiu Vi and the others the opportunity to attack, causing him to suffer several blade wounds and fall to the ground. There was only one reason why Yu Suzuki stood there like a fool. After the sword was slashed, there was no resistance and no blood was spilled. It was as if he had slashed through the air, but he clearly saw the sword slashing through the target's throat. What the hell is going on? No one knows and no one will know what is the limit of Yang Qindong's speed right now. Because just now, because his speed was too fast, there was actually an afterimage. That ninja sword was just an afterimage, but because it was too fast, it actually gave people a very real feeling. Yang Qindong, who used his extreme speed, appeared next to Yu Suzuki. But he didn't take the opportunity to attack. Chiu Vi and the other Longwei ninjas had already attacked. He already knew the result. Leave him alive. After saying those words, Yang Qindong had already leaped over here and quickly rushed towards the last ninja, who was standing at the entrance of the North Village. Kitamura's strength wasn't bad. Not only did he injure Kobayashi, but he also forced the other two Longwei ninjas to retreat. If Beta Persei hadn't been pestering him, he would have already left this place. With only Beta Persei as his opponent, Kitamura was very relaxed. Speaking of which, in terms of overall strength, Kitamura wasn't Beta Persei's opponent. For example, when it comes to fighting on the battlefield, they weren't even on the same level. In other words, Beta Persei's Kung Fu was an open strategy, focused on opening and closing. On the other hand, Kitamura's Kung Fu was a conspiracy focused on speed, accuracy, and surprise attacks. When a hero meets an assassin, it's easy to imagine that the former would be very aggrieved, having a feeling of powerlessness. Beta Persei was like that. Although he was already using a lot of strength, every time he was about to press down on his opponent, Bei Quanku only needed to increase his speed to dodge nimbly and return to safety. He could even pose a certain threat to Yang Er. On the battlefield, Yang Er had followed Yang Qindong to this day. Everywhere he passed, there were piles of bones of the enemy. All of them were pointed at by the weapons and no one could stop them. But when facing an opponent like Kitamura, who didn't want to fight him head-on, he felt powerless. This made him unable to help but yell to vent his grievances. While Beta Persei was yelling and shouting like he was going crazy, Kitamura continued to fight while paying attention to the changes in the battlefield. Especially when his target was killed, Chua knelt on the ground without any warning. Then, after a brief moment of shock, Yu Suzuki was injured by Longwei and subdued on the ground. All of these changes happened so quickly that it was completely beyond Kitamura's imagination. Just as he was wondering what was going on, Yang Qindong, dressed in green, was already 5 meters in front of him. Although there was still a distance of 5 meters between them, the North Village entrance could already feel the presence of danger from the pressure. After 2 of his companions were subdued, he already knew that this mission was impossible to complete. What he needed to do now was to leave this place immediately. A white smoke suddenly appeared without warning, and then Kitamura, who was standing between Yang Qindong and Beta Persei, suddenly disappeared into thin air. It was as if no one had ever been there. The scene in front of him shocked Beta Persei. He had only heard about ninjas before, but this was the first time he saw what happened. On the other hand, Yang Qindong's face didn't change at all. As early as in his previous life, in order to complete various missions, he had fought with ninjas more than once. But at that time, technology was extremely advanced, and the ninja's advantage had gradually declined. A single sentence could decide everything. Can a person be faster than a bullet? Especially with all kinds of surveillance equipment, all kinds of special glasses, it was very difficult to hide in thin air. But now, the ninja's method of hiding using light and sound waves was very powerful. At least, Yang Qindong needed some time to find the other party's trace. Fortunately, it was daytime and there wasn't much cover. With his extraordinary experience, Yang Qindong quickly locked on to the direction. Suddenly, he pointed to a big tree 10 meters away from the spring and said, "He's there, hiding in the tree." Chapter 1091. This shout attracted everyone's attention. Soon, everyone found a faint shadow on the big tree. If it wasn't Bei Guku who had just disappeared, who else could it be? Bei Siyuan did not expect that he would still be discovered even though he had used everything he could and even increased his speed. At this moment he suddenly had a bad feeling. He was afraid that not only would he fail to kill his target this time, but he might also be in danger. Knowing that both of his companions had been captured, he had to leave. At least, he had to report what happened here to the higher-ups so that they could make some preparations. Therefore he had to leave. Since his position had been exposed, Bei Siyuan did not need to use any fancy means to hide his whereabouts. He simply jumped from this tree to a nearby tree looking like a gibbon. "Chase, we can't let him escape." Beta Persei saw that Bei Siyuan wanted to escape. He angrily took out a Type 54 pistol from his waist and prepared to lead his men into the dense forest. No need. Beta Persei, who was about to leave, was suddenly stopped by someone. He was just about to curse when he saw that the person who stopped him was Yang Qindong. He stood there obediently. Then the young master's voice clearly entered his ears. "Don't worry, he can't run away." Yang Qindong said this because he had discovered something. With his powerful 5 senses, he had already heard footsteps coming from the dense forest, and there was more than one. Although those people were very careful, Yang Qindong still caught them. Since they could appear here at this time, they should not be enemies. Otherwise, they would have attacked them instead of choosing to be defeated one by one. There was only one possibility left. and that was the Langya Special Forces who had rushed here after seeing the signal flare. There were 200 Langya Special Forces just to deal with a ninja in the forest where they were best at. Yang Qindong really had no reason to think that they could not catch him. What he had to do now was to stand there and wait for news. In less than a quarter of an hour, the sound of footsteps came from the dense forest. A burly man appeared in the lead. It was King Kong of the Wolf Fang. "Greetings, Liu Bai. We have already caught him. He is very fast and agile." Without any other choice, the team members could only use the crossbow. Both of his legs were pierced through. As soon as King Kong appeared, he gave a simple report of the situation. Then 2 members of the team threw North Village entrance who had been shot in both legs, onto the ground like dragging a dead dog. Hee. Seeing that the last killer was taken down, Yang Qindong was very happy. "Thank you for your hard work, brothers. Now do one more thing. Pull out all their molars immediately." Yang Qindong, who has long known the habits of ninjas, will never give the 3 people a chance to commit suicide. They are of great use. Their role was no less than that of an army of thousands. How could he let them die so easily? Yu Suzuki and the other 2 did have poison hidden in their mouths, which was used to commit suicide at the most critical moment. But because the matter hasn't reached the final moment, they still want to take the opportunity to see if they can escape, so no one thought of committing suicide. Who would have thought that Yang Qindong, who was clear about all of this, would make the first move and take away their last chance to commit suicide? At this point, the 3 of them had become meat on the chopping board, waiting to be slaughtered. The interrogation was handed over to Beta Persei. Yang Qindong took Junko's hand and returned to the 5-star Army's camp under the protection of Chiu Vi and the others. The 3 special ninjas were all captured by Yang Qindong. Especially after Xiao Lin, who was in the crowd, recognized the identities of the 3 people. The extent of the 6th young master's strength had become a mystery. Everyone only knows that if it's a one-on-one battle, no one can last more than 3 rounds against the 6th young master, and most people can't even last 1 round. They are also proud to have such a powerful leader. These days, Matsumoto Kazuma's life has not been good. He has undergone inhuman ninja training since he was a child. Not only is his physical fitness excellent, but even his mentality is also very good. But for some reason he has been suffering from insomnia these days. This is something that has never happened to him since he was a child. The 3 people in the North Village haven't sent back a message until now, especially recently they haven't sent back a single message, so he can't help but think about it. If he didn't consider the strength of the 3 people in the North Village, he would have thought that something happened to them. Will something really happen to them? After the problem appeared, Matsumoto Kazuma asked himself in his heart. It shouldn't be. The thought just appeared in his mind, but it was rejected by himself. The strength of these 3 people is comparable to his own. It's because he knows them too well that Matsumoto Kazuma doesn't believe that anyone can control them. Not to mention that the 3 people are very powerful special ninjas. If it's not the right time, they will never easily make a move. With the ability of the 3 of them, it's impossible for all of them to be caught. At least 1 or 2 of them can escape. It's because he knows them too well that Matsumoto Kazuma is so confident. If it's another commander, they may have already prepared for the worst. Matsumoto Kazuma has his own ideas and persistence, and even the pride of a ninja in his heart. As a parasitic ninja who has always been attached to other forces, he has always had an idea. That is, he hopes that one day he can break all the shackles, no longer rely on others, and he can stand on his own and stand alone. For this goal, I don't know how many seniors have worked hard and struggled for a lifetime, but in the end, no one has been able to do it. All of this has a lot to do with the special training of ninja. To become a qualified ninja, it takes not only hard work and effort, but also a mentality that requires one to be undistracted, not to be disturbed by everything, and to be able to devote oneself to it wholeheartedly. Only in this way can a truly excellent ninja be trained. It's just that people eat grains. How can they have no feelings and don't come into contact with worldly things? Just like ninjas, although their physical fitness is different from ordinary people, they still have to eat after all. They are not ascetics. In order to ensure physical coordination and absolute health, their requirements for food will only be higher. Otherwise, how can a malnourished person be trained for nearly 8 hours a day? And all of this requires money, a lot of money. And training ninja also requires a process, and for some people this process is still very long. This has led to the fact that this is an industry with a large investment and slow results, and there are very few people who are interested in it. There are even fewer people who are interested and have enough financial strength and patience. This is also the reason why, with the financial resources of the Supreme General Ashikaga Yoshimasa, he can only train 4 special ninjas, and the entire Japanese Empire only has 5 special ninjas. It's really because the external conditions don't allow it, and it's not that ninjas don't have to do their best. It is precisely because the number of suitable ninjas is too small that they have become even weaker, so that they don't have enough confidence to speak in the face of any forces. In order to change the situation, Matsumoto Kazuma took the initiative to take the task of assassinating Yang Qindong, in order to make a bang so that everyone can see the power of their ninja. But it was apparent that things weren't going as smoothly as he imagined. In order to save the ninja's face, Matsumoto Kazuma didn't dare to tell the Supreme General about the loss of contact with the Kitamura trio. In the face of Ashikaga Yoshimasa's urging several times, he didn't tell the truth. Perhaps because there is no progress, or perhaps because Matsumoto Kazuma's lack of confidence was seen in the eyes of Ashikaga Yoshimasa. Gradually he stopped putting his hope in the ninja, and didn't do anything to urge him. But the more this is the case, the more uncomfortable Matsumoto Kazuma's mood became. He felt a sense of abandonment. When a person is no longer valued by others and becomes a dispensable existence, all his dreams and ambitions will only get further and further away from the day of realization, so much so that Matsumoto Fujima became somewhat decadent, giving up the principles of ninja and drinking all day long. On this day Matsumoto Kazuma woke up drunk. Slowly opening his eyes, he found that he fell asleep in the hall. He couldn't help but shake his head with a wry smile. When did he become like this? Where did the previous righteous Matsumoto Kazuma go? He wanted to cheer up again, but when he thought of the Kitamura trio in his mind, there was no news, not even a little bit of news. The feeling of wanting to cheer up disappeared. If something really happened to them, would he be able to lead the ninjas to stand up again? If even the strongest ninja can't complete the task, then what hope does this organization have? What's the point of standing in this world? Shaking his head, Matsumoto Kazuma took a bottle of wine and poured it into his mouth. He wanted to use alcohol to comfort his wounded soul. Although the degree of wine in the Japanese Empire is not high, for him who has no experience in drinking, it is enough to numb his nerves. After pouring a third of the bottle of wine into his mouth, Matsumoto Kazuma felt a slightly spicy taste. The corner of his mouth revealed a satisfied smile. He really didn't know what else to do besides drinking. Clang. The loud sound of the door opening aroused Matsumoto Kazuma's vigilance. This is the ninja courtyard. According to the ninja's behavior, even the lowest genin walks quietly. It is absolutely impossible to make such a big noise when opening the door. This noise also attracted Matsumoto Kazuma's attention. Just when he was about to get up and go outside to see what is going on, the sound of sword clashing entered his ears, and then the door of his bedroom was pushed open, and 4 ninjas rushed in. Kun Matsumoto, we are surrounded. It is the Supreme General's samurai team. Some of our companions have died in the courtyard. You should leave quickly. Chapter 1092. The Great General's Samurai Team? Matsumoto Kazuma's face changed. They are the elites of the Great General's Guard. How many people have tried to assassinate Ashikaga Yoshimasa, but they have been saved by this team, and they have become the same trump card as the ninja team. It's just that the former is more suitable for defense, and the ninja are more suitable for assassination. Originally, these two lines don't intersect, one in the light and the other in the dark. But why would these samurai attack the ninja? Even if he disappointed the Great General, he shouldn't send people to deal with him, right? What exactly had happened that he didn't know about? The doubts on Matsumoto Kazuma's face were seen in the eyes of the 4 jonins, and they became even more anxious. The samurai's movements were very fast. Coupled with their preparation, the ninja's team had already suffered a lot. If they don't escape in time, I'm afraid they won't even have the chance to leave this place. One of the jonins was so anxious that he ignored Matsumoto Kazuma, who was still immersed in his fantasy, and took the initiative to step forward and grabbed his arm and said, Kun Matsumoto, leave here first. As long as you are still alive, there is still hope for our ninja. Yes, yes. The other 3 jonins also made a sound and tried their best to cooperate. No. I won't go. I want to have a good talk with them. Why do they want to attack our ninja? Does the Great General know about this? Matsumoto Kazuma's temper rose. He thought that the samurai team's actions were private, because ninja and samurai are usually opposite, and the 2 sides have not seen eye to eye for a long time. He has reason to suspect that these actions are to vent their anger, because as long as the Great General is not stupid, he should know that there is no benefit in killing him, and on the contrary, it will make the opponent laugh secretly. This kind of thing that hurts the family and makes the enemy happy. Matsumoto Kazuma doesn't believe that the great general will do it, so he went out to reason with the people who came. For this reason, he even broke away from the outstretched arm of the jonin on the side, pushed open the bedroom door and walked out. The courtyard that belongs to the ninja has long been designated as a training base, so the area here is not small. At this moment, the people here have long been fighting in a group, there are ninja corpses everywhere, and the air has long been filled with a pungent smell of blood. When Matsumoto Fuma walked out, he saw this scene. He also happened to see a samurai holding a bushido and slashing at a genin. Out of instinct to protect his companions, he jumped out and kicked the samurai's wrist, forcing him to retreat, and then he shouted, "What are you doing? Who gave you the right to attack? Haha, Kun Matsumoto, are you finally willing to come out?" The short silence was broken by a burst of laughter. A man who is slightly taller than the ordinary people of the Japanese Empire walked out of the crowd. He is 178 meters tall and has a strong aura. His appearance is very dazzling for the people who are less than 17 meters tall. The man walked out in large strides, and when Matsumoto Kazuma saw him, he couldn't help but stare at him and said, "Yamaguchi-kun, you came in person?" Yamaguchi Fukada, Ninja General Ashikaga Yoshimasa's bodyguard, and also the captain of the samurai team. He is one of the most trusted people of the ninja general. Oftentimes, his appearance and actions could directly represent the supreme general, which was why Matsumoto Fuma was so surprised. Looking at Yamaguchi Fukada, Matsumoto Kazuma couldn't help but think, is all of this really the ninja general's idea? Yes, I came in person. Since Kun Matsumoto is here, can you ask your ninjas to stop first? I also know that you must have a lot of questions, so you can come with me to see the ninja general, and if you have any questions you can talk to him face to face. Yamaguchi Fukada said with a very reasonable appearance, and his words were full of consideration for the other party. These words moved Matsumoto Kazuma. Although he is very sad about the hundreds of ninjas who have fallen to the ground and died, he wants to know the reason. So after hearing these words, he bowed deeply to Yamaguchi Fukada, who is more than 10 meters away, and said, "Thank you, Yamaguchi-kun. Since that is the case, I am willing to go with you to see the ninja general and make things clear." "Kun Matsumoto, you can't." The 4 jonin behind him shouted anxiously. Since the samurai has already made a move on the ninjas, this is originally the result of a fight to the death, how can they easily believe the other party? "Enough, don't say any more, I believe in Yamaguchi-kun's character, I am willing to go with them to see the ninja general." Matsumoto Kazuma waved his hand. In order to show his sincerity, he also took out his ninja sword and handed it to a jonin behind him, then turned around to show that he has no more weapons. Matsumoto Kazuma's sincerity is already full, but Yamaguchi Fukada on the opposite side seems to be not satisfied. Instead he said, "And the medicine bottle on your body, take it out, I don't want you to go to the ninja general and play tricks." The so-called medicine bottle refers to the auxiliary substance used by ninjas to perform ecstasy jutsu and other means. Just like a cloud of smoke, the ninja will disappear. This is the function of the medicine bottle. The thing inside can make light have a certain chemical reaction for a while, thus achieving the goal of helping them escape. Since they are old rivals, how can Yamaguchi Fukada not know what other things Matsumoto Kazuma has? So he said, "Okay, I will hand them all over." Matsumoto Kazuma was very cooperative, took out a porcelain bottle from his body, and handed it to the person holding the sword behind him. Then he looked at Yamaguchi Fukada in the distance and said, "Now there is no problem, right? You can take me to see the ninja general." "Okay. Kon Matsumoto, please." Seeing the other party so cooperative, Yamaguchi Fukada nodded with satisfaction, then made a sideways movement to lead the way. "Please." Matsumoto Kazuma said so very politely, then strode forward, straight toward Yamaguchi Fukada's position. His action also attracted the attention of the ninjas present. On the surface, Matsumoto Kazuma looked relaxed, but with every step he took, he was ready to make a move at any time. What he was thinking was not as simple as what he showed on the surface. Even at this moment, his whole body was tense. With a smile on his face, Yamaguchi Fukada let Matsumoto Kazuma approach. Until the distance between the two sides was only 1 meter, he still didn't have any intention to make a move. Instead, he turned around and really wanted to take him to see the ninja general. "All samurai, listen to my order. Without orders, you are not allowed to attack anyone." "Yes." The hundreds of samurai who had arrived all nodded in agreement. Then one by one they held their samurai swords in their hands. "Thank you." Seeing that Yamaguchi Fukada was so trustworthy, Matsumoto Kazuma also breathed a sigh of relief. Then he also shouted loudly, "All ninjas listen to my order. Without orders, you are not allowed to attack anyone." Yes. Hundreds of ninjas also responded in unison. Each put down the katana in their hands, and some of the injured ninjas simply sat on the ground, then called their companions to bandage their wounds. After Matsumoto Kazuma did this, he looked at Yamaguchi Fukada and said, "Yamaguchi-kun, I will have to trouble you to lead the way. You are too polite, please. By the way, Kun Matsumoto, do you know why the ninja general ordered you to be taught a lesson?" Yamaguchi Fukada asked with a meaningful smile on his face. What? This was the question in his heart. At this moment, Matsumoto Kazuma was really too curious. "I'll tell you." Yamaguchi Fukada stopped moving forward, turned around, approached Matsumoto Kazuma, and then looked like he wanted to whisper something. Cooperating with the other party, Matsumoto Kazuma also leaned his head over. He also wanted to hear what was going on. If he didn't solve this mystery, even if he saw the ninja general, he wouldn't know what to say. He leaned his head over, but because his head was lowered, he didn't notice the flash of pride in Yamaguchi Fukada's eyes. When the distance between the two people was infinitely close, suddenly there was a pain in his waist. At this moment, a katana was stabbed into Matsumoto Kazuma's waist, and blood quickly dripped down along the blade. Yamaguchi Fukada suddenly made a move, showing the neon people's untrustworthiness, insidious and cunning. His men who had already put down their katanas, also made a move. They didn't even need anyone to give the order. The sharp blades slashed at the ninjas who had already aimed at them. This sudden turn of events was out of everyone's expectations. Most of the ninjas were still sitting on the ground or enjoying the help of their companions, but they were already killed by the katana. The situation instantly became one-sided. In just a few breaths, no less than dozens of ninjas were killed because they were unprepared. Why is this? Matsumoto Fujita covered the katana on his waist and stared at Yamaguchi Fujita in front of him with a pair of disbelieving eyes. Why? At this moment, Yamaguchi Fukada no longer had a smile on his face, but returned to a cold state and said, "Because of the incompetence of your ninjas, the assassination failed, and you were captured alive. Now the 5-star army has declared war on the Supreme General. Now their vanguard army is about to reach Ping in Beijing, and this place is about to fall into the hands of others. With such a big mistake, do you think the Supreme General will forgive you? Why do you think this is?" In a short period of time, Yamaguchi Fukada continuously threw out so many questions and truths, making Matsumoto Kazuma stand there. For a while he was at a loss. The assassination of the 3 ninjas at the north entrance of the village really failed, but why were they captured alive? Even if they couldn't escape, they should have died. Their teeth are highly poisonous. How could they be captured alive? Chapter 1093. After telling the answer, Yamaguchi Fukada looked at his old opponent Matsumoto Kazuma's painful expression and couldn't help but laugh proudly. This time he didn't only want his opponent's life, but he also wanted his opponent's despair. Only in this way can he be considered to have defeated his opponent. After laughing, Yamaguchi Fukada once again raised the butcher's knife in his hand. Looking at his appearance, it was clear that he wanted to continue to chop down and end his opponent's life. "Kun Matsumoto, quickly leave." A figure suddenly rushed over, and when the knife fell, it was chopped on the figure. Looking carefully, it was one of the 4 ninjas who persuaded Kuroto to leave. He used his body to block the knife, giving Matsumoto Kazuma a glimmer of hope to survive. The knife fell, but it didn't hit Matsumoto Kazuma's body. Yamaguchi Fukada's eyes showed a trace of anger. He pulled out the knife and slashed again, but he lost the opportunity to kill because the other 3 ninjas rushed over. 2 of them waved their swords to block the knife, and the other ninja carried the stunned Matsumoto Kazuma and jumped toward the courtyard. Obviously he wanted to take him away from here. "Want to leave?" Yamaguchi Fukada's face didn't show any panic. Obviously he was very familiar with ninjas, so he was already prepared. He smiled and waved his right hand. The moment he waved his hand, 200 shadows suddenly appeared around the courtyard. They were wearing samurai clothes, and they were holding strong bows and crossbows in their hands. Their standard and uniform movements proved that they were a well-trained army. When 200 shadows appeared, many ninjas' eyes showed a look of horror. Some people couldn't help but shout, "My God, Divine Archery Battalion!" The Divine Archery Battalion was composed of the best archers in the Japanese army. They not only have nearly 100% accuracy in archery, but also undergo strict physical training. According to the founder of this army, General Ashikaga Yoshimasa, this army must be able to use bows and arrows, and use swords to kill the enemy. The requirements were too harsh, so it has been established for a long time, but the number of people has not been very sufficient, only 500. It became a trump card in the hands of the general, and he won't act rashly. What Kuroda didn't expect is that this time, in order to deal with ninjas, he actually dispatched 200 people. It seems that this time Kuroda is really angry, and he wants to destroy this ninja unit that he used to be proud of. When he saw that it was the Divine Archery Battalion, Matsumoto Kazuma, who had a knife in his stomach, stopped the idea of continuing to escape. Originally he was injured and it was difficult for him to move, so the chance of escaping was very slim. Now there were fully prepared divine archers on the periphery. Doesn't this mean that the inescapable net has been set up, and even if he wanted to escape, there would be no chance for him to escape? Instead of being killed while escaping, it was better to stay and fight and die together with his brothers. At least he can gain a reputation for loyalty. Matsumoto Kazuma pulled back his hand and said to the jonin who was helping him to leave, "Forget it, there is no chance. It is better to fight with all our strength, and kill a few more people is equivalent to revenge for our brothers." The jonin didn't speak. At this moment he didn't know what to say. Yes, since the Divine Archery Battalion has appeared, how can there be a chance for them to escape? Since he was going to die, he might as well go all out before he died. One was an injured special ninja, and the other was a jonin. The two were holding ninja swords back to back. They relied on each other, but at the same time, they also turned their backs to each other. They were ready to kill the enemy at any time. Matsumoto Kazuma stopped running, and Yamaguchi Fukada laughed proudly. Is this old opponent finally going to accept his fate? Does he really think that death will be so easy? No. He wants to watch this old opponent die step by step. Even if he dies, he won't let this old enemy die easily. Yamaguchi Fukada, who was laughing, showed a gloomy look on his face. After that, he made a gesture, and most of the 200 soldiers of the Divine Archery Battalion adjusted the angle and target of their arrows, leaving only 20 people to stare at Matsumoto Kazuma. Matsumoto Kazuma saw the excitement of the soldiers of the Divine Archery Battalion, and he had a bad feeling, so he exclaimed loudly, "No, don't." As if to confirm his guess, as soon as his shout fell, hundreds of arrows broke through the air and shot toward those ninjas who were desperately resisting in the courtyard. Originally they were in a disadvantageous position. After being attacked suddenly and being schemed by Yamaguchi Fukada, the number of ninjas has sharply decreased, and only 1/3 of their strength was left. The arrival of this wave of arrows accelerated the process of their death. Especially in front of them, there were samurai who were entangled with them, so they couldn't do anything to dodge. Many ninjas were killed by the arrows. The archers of the Divine Archery Battalion were worthy of their title. Every arrow was shot with a very clear target, and they could bypass the samurai and hit the ninjas. They were either killed by an arrow in a vital part of their body or pierced into their arms or legs, reducing their mobility and agility. With just one wave of arrows, at least 50 ninjas died tragically on the ground, and dozens of others suffered different degrees of injuries. This made the situation worse for the ninjas, who were already in a bad situation, and even their resistance became weaker. "No, don't. I'll fight with you." Watching the ninjas he trained hard and his companions who have been with him for many years being shot one by one under his eyes, Matsumoto Fuma's eyes were red, as if they were about to spit out flames. He wanted to kill all the enemies. In anger, Matsumoto Kazuma completely ignored the knife wound on his abdomen. Even if he was injured, a special ninja was still a special ninja. Like a cold wind, he killed his way into the samurai who were showing off their might, and then stabbed his sword to the left and right. One by one, the samurai who were unprepared or who were prepared but had no power to fight back, became sheep in the lion's mouth, became the target, and were stabbed to death on the ground. Originally, he had a face full of laughter, imagining how painful it would be for Matsumoto Kazuma to watch his subordinates and companions die one by one. Suddenly, when he saw this person move and kill several of his subordinates, the smile on his face disappeared, and was replaced by anxiety and anger. A person who was about to die, an ant that he could trample to death at any time, dared to resist. This was unacceptable. Yamaguchi Fukada roared, and then rushed toward Matsumoto Kazuma with his sword. At the same time, he didn't forget to make a shooting gesture toward the surrounding walls. The expressions of the 20 God Arrow Battalion and the Master Archers were also very ugly. Originally, they thought that Matsumoto Kazuma was already a fat piece of meat on the chopping board, and they could decide his life and death as they wished. But they didn't expect that he dared to resist, and in such a short time he even killed 2 samurai. This was simply a provocation to their archery skills. Release the arrows. A captain couldn't help but shout in his heart, and the arrows of the 20 master archers also moved along with Matsumoto Kazuma's movements. The advantage of ninjas was their flexibility and the strangeness of their figure. When it came to face-to-face combat, they were not as good as samurai. This was also the reason why ninjas were always suppressed in a head-on battle. But when they were able to fully exert their advantages, like Matsumoto Kazuma now, who was constantly moving among the samurai like a civet, it was impossible to completely capture his figure. The archers finally found a chance to shoot a few arrows, but not only did most of them miss, but one arrow even hit a samurai's body, accidentally injuring one of their own. Matsumoto Kazuma's speed was so fast that it was beyond his usual level. He also saw that the wound on his lower abdomen was constantly dripping blood, and he knew that if this continued, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to live long, even if others didn't kill him. Since he knew that he was going to die, what was there to be afraid of? He just had to give it his all and kill as many people as he could. It could also be considered as an explanation to his brothers as a captain. At least if they could be together after death, he wouldn't be ashamed of anyone. Matsumoto Kazuma, who was close to madness, became synonymous with the Grim Reaper. Wherever he passed, samurai fell to the ground. Most people only saw a shadow appear, and then they felt a pain in their body and lost their senses forever. Because of Matsumoto Kazuma, the courtyard became more and more chaotic. Originally, it was only a one-sided battle, but now it became a situation where everyone could become prey. At this moment, on another high wall 500 meters away from the courtyard, a group of black-clothed men were lying there, as if they were a layer of black tiles on the roof of the courtyard. If it wasn't for someone speaking at this time, no one would be able to tell that everything in front of them was made of human bodies. "General, please save our comrades and our captain, he's about to die." With an anxious expression, Chuishiki used his binoculars to see everything clearly, and finally couldn't hold it in and begged. At this moment, Chuishiki wasn't interested in asking what the binoculars in his hands were, or how it could close the distance between them. Right now, he only wanted the people around him to help and save Matsumoto Kazuma and his brothers. "That's right, General, please act quickly. As long as you can save our captain and comrades, I'm willing to swear that I'll be loyal to Bugnam of Gojoseon for the rest of my life." Yu Suzuki also spoke. Compared to Chuishiki, he was willing to swear his loyalty. Other than Kitamura, who was still recovering from his leg injury, Yu Suzuki and Chuishiki, who hadn't fully recovered from their shoulder injuries, were also here. The reason why they were here was all because of Yang Chendong. Chapter 1094. The ambush at the foot of the mountain not only failed to kill Yang Chendong, but even Long Wei, who was beside him, was not killed. Only 2 of them were slightly injured. In exchange, 2 of the special ninjas were injured and 1 was captured. In the end, all 3 of them were captured alive. After the 3 of them were captured, Yang Chendong first handed them over to Beta Persei. He believed that with the interrogation and torture methods he and Beta Persei had learned, it wouldn't take long for the 3 of them to suffer a fate worse than death. They would forever regret the moment when they had the idea to attack him. But things were always unexpected. Princess Junko suddenly came to his door. After there was no one else in the tent, she knelt on the ground in front of Yang Chendong's puzzled eyes. She knelt in front of her husband. "Madam, why are you doing this?" Yang Chendong's eyes flashed with doubts. He thought that he knew this student whom he had known for several years very well, but at this moment he was also stunned by Junko's sudden action. "King." After hearing Yang Chendong's unique name, Junko slowly raised her head. "King Junko begs you, don't kill those 3 people. They are the best talents of the Japanese Empire. They should be used by King and they shouldn't die in silence like this." Junko actually wanted to save the 3 special ninjas, which was really beyond Yang Chendong's expectation. As far as he knew, when the Emperor was still in power, these special ninjas gave him a lot of problems, and he didn't even know how many times they had opposed him. They were supposed to be enemies, so why would she plead for mercy for the other party? Yang Chendong's doubts were seen by Junko and she actually smiled and said, "King Junko really hates them. But it's even more clear that they are just following orders. Junko's real enemy is Ashikaga Yoshimasa. In order to achieve this goal, other people can be used and cooperated with. She even said something like making use of him. It can be seen that she was indeed standing on Yang Qindong's side, and she even forgot her identity as the princess of the Japanese Empire. These days, with Junko's understanding of the five-star army gradually deepened, especially after seeing the bravery of the 1st Cavalry Division. Although she was unwilling, she had to make a judgment. The five-star army was too strong. It was so strong that the disordered Japanese Empire couldn't stop it. If the Japanese Empire was truly unified in the hands of her father, with a strong military base, she would still fight against him. But now, the Neon people's minds were in chaos, and there was constant fighting among the higher-ups. More than half of their strength had been consumed, and now Neon was more fragile than ever. In the face of the powerful five-star army, defeat was certain. It was just a matter of time. The result was already decided. Junko was a smart person. Since she was a little emperor, she had never done anything that went against the heavens. What she thought about was how to maximize the benefits, how to turn all the disadvantages into advantages. Even if she knew that the rise of the five-star army was inevitable, how to preserve the strength of the Japanese Empire became something she must consider. Although she didn't dare to have extravagant hopes of reviving her country, she didn't dare to imagine that even if Yang Qindong had become her man. As a person who was born in a country where women's rights weren't valued, she had such thoughts and awareness since she was a child. It didn't matter if she couldn't revive her country, she didn't dare to force it. What she wanted was to leave more seeds for the Japanese Empire, leave more marks. At least, when people talked about it, the future generations would know that there was a Japanese Empire in the past, and that was enough. To achieve this goal, the spread of ninjas was undoubtedly the key. In a sense, when people talked about ninjas, they would naturally mention the Japanese Empire, and that was enough. In order to achieve this goal, the 3 special ninjas under the rock couldn't die. This was the reason why she came to see Yang Qindong, and she didn't hesitate to kneel down as soon as they met to achieve this goal. Junko opened her mouth to plead for mercy for the 3 special ninjas, which was somewhat beyond Yang Qindong's expectation. Confucius said that only villains and women were difficult to raise. One of the meanings was that women were often emotional creatures. Logic had little effect on them, and they were often more used to acting on their emotions. With this point in mind, Yang Qindong never thought that Junko would plead for mercy for any of Ashikaga Yoshimasa's subordinates. Even if the death of her father's family wasn't directly related to those people, there was always an indirect relationship. It would be good if she didn't come to beg him to kill all of them. How could she plead for mercy for them? Junko's abnormal behavior also attracted Yang Qindong's attention. He discovered that he had been underestimating this woman. She was really worthy of being born in the imperial family. Her behavior was really different from others. This move also successfully attracted Yang Qindong's attention. She was even willing to let go of her father's death. Such a woman really made people vigilant. Madam Hachi, what are you doing? Do you want to use them for yourself? Yang Qindong asked bluntly without any probing. He directly spoke out his thoughts. When the words came out, Junko's face suddenly stiffened. She knew that her behavior was misunderstood. She also knew that once Yang Qindong had a bad opinion of her, she was afraid that she would never be happy. Even if it was for herself, she had to explain clearly. My king, I don't want to use them for myself. Since I gave you my body, I have paid all my feelings. I just want to be the 8th madam, and I don't have any thoughts or desires. If my king doesn't believe me, you can send someone to send me away now. I promise that I won't complain. Junko raised her head and looked at Yang Qindong with a very firm look, expressing her feelings. The two of them stared at each other in this way. At this moment, Yang Qindong seemed to be able to see Junko's heart through her eyes. This scene lasted for about 3 or 4 breaths of time. Finally, Yang Qindong took the lead to turn his head to the side. He didn't want to doubt Junko. He also liked this lovely but ill-fated girl. Whether it was out of pity or affection, he didn't want to give up on her so easily. Therefore, he didn't want to guess her real thoughts. Well, I believe you for the time being. Then tell me, if you don't want to take them for your own use, what are you trying to do? Yang Qindong asked. Facing this question, Junko was determined to be honest. She knew that there weren't many chances for her to explain. If she didn't seize this opportunity, she was afraid that she wouldn't have another chance to explain everything and tell her thoughts. My king, Junko knows that this time the Japanese Empire is doomed. Perhaps it won't be long before the Japanese Empire becomes a province under the 5-star army. Speaking of this, the corner of Junko's mouth couldn't help but twitch slightly. After all, the motherland was about to be destroyed, no one would be happy. But when she thought about how her parents and brother died in the hands of her own people, she thought that even if the Japanese Empire was powerful, it wouldn't be able to escape the sharp sword of the five-star army. She quickly felt relieved and continued to say, the Japanese Empire becoming a province under the five-star army is a good thing for the people. Junko is happy for them. Oh, you really think so? Yang Qindong suddenly interrupted and asked. For Junko, who had already become his eighth wife, Yang Qindong didn't want to force her. But today, since they had talked like this, some questions that were usually difficult to ask could be asked clearly. He hoped that through today's conversation, they could completely eliminate the last barrier between them, and become a truly selfless husband and wife. Yes, Junko said with a very firm tone. The Japanese Empire becoming a province under the five-star army is naturally a good thing for the people. They can forever avoid the flames of war, and live a peaceful and happy life. This is of course a good thing. It's a good thing for the people, but for the higher-ups of the Japanese Empire, it's not necessarily a good thing. Yang Qindong said again. At the same time, he stared closely at Junko, wanting to see her true thoughts. That's right, it's not a good thing for the higher-ups. But the royal family has been destroyed, and for Junko there are no higher-ups. Now Junko is not a princess but a commoner, the eighth wife of the king, that's all. Since she wants to be a wife, why does she still care about the ninjas? Yang Qindong didn't believe Junko easily, especially this woman was a member of the royal family of the Japanese Empire. The shadow of the future was too big, and he didn't want the country that he worked so hard to build to be stolen by an outsider, even if that person was his wife. When it came to the main topic, Junko didn't have the slightest intention to hide, and took the initiative to explain. Junko just wants to leave a mark on the Japanese Empire, and at the same time, as a former princess, I want to do something for them. Besides, ninjas are a very strong force. In the past, when the emperor was still alive, he once said that ninjas have many branches, but because they can't unite together, they can't use their full strength. My king, if you want to conquer the world and create miracles in the end, wouldn't it be better to have as many strong helpers as possible? Since you can give a chance to the foreign cavalry on the grassland, why can't you give a chance to the ninjas? Junko said all the words in the bottom of her heart, and then looked at Yang Qindong intently. The look in her eyes was very strong. It was obvious that she hoped that Yang Qindong would agree, so that she could do something for the Japanese Empire and live up to her identity as a princess. Even if one day she went to the ground to see her father, she would have something to explain. Yang Qindong didn't answer immediately, but constantly analyzed the pros and cons in his heart. No one knew better than Yang Qindong what the Japanese Empire's people were like. When you were strong, they would kneel down and lick your boots. When you were weak, they would find all kinds of excuses to bully you. Chapter 1095. Yang Qindong didn't like such national characteristics, so he only thought of one way to deal with the so-called ninjas, which was to eliminate them. Completely eliminate them. As long as he killed all these ninjas, there would be no such title in the future. Only then could he rest assured and leave everything to his descendants. However, Junko's words were also not wrong. Why could he tolerate the grassland people joining the five-star army but not the ninjas? Since he knew that the people of the Japanese Empire respected the strong, as long as he was strong enough, he didn't need to worry about them rebelling against him one day. If he was really worried, he could just get rid of them after he conquered the world. Yang Qindong felt that he was in the wrong when dealing with other people, but when it came to the Japanese Empire, he didn't think that there was anything he couldn't do. After a full quarter of an hour of silence, Yang Qindong didn't say anything. Junko was waiting on the side, just like a suspect in a court of law, waiting for the final verdict. Finally, Yang Qindong opened his mouth and looked at Junko. I can agree to your request, but do you have a way to persuade them? This was equivalent to agreeing, so Junko was naturally happy. However, what she said next made Yang Qindong a little dumbfounded. My king, Junko doesn't know how to do it, but the omnipotent king will definitely think of a good way, right? There was no way to explain things and all hope fell on himself. At this moment, Yang Qindong wanted to slap his forehead and sigh, but he didn't. As Junko said, he was the omnipotent king, of course there was nothing that could be difficult for him. Well, if that's the case, I still need Madam's cooperation. You can do this. Yang Qindong quickly thought of a way. Although he couldn't guarantee that it would work, he didn't need these ninjas. With such a preconceived idea, it wasn't difficult to think of a plan. Yang Qindong's idea wasn't that brilliant, but it was very effective. First, he asked Junko to visit the 3 special ninjas as the princess of the Japanese Empire. She wanted to get closer to them and at the same time, express her respect and love for them. During the contact, Junko represented Yang Qindong to express the importance of ninjas and promised to help them develop. After the implementation of the plan, sure enough, the performance of the 3 special ninjas was not as stubborn as before. As I said before, the growth process of a ninja is destined to not be able to distract their attention. They can't be too entangled with the secular world, they can only rely on other rich clans to grow up effectively. Considering that the training process is too long and requires more financial support, it effectively hinders the development of the ninja team. This was also the reason why they were under the control of Ashikaga Yoshimasa. Compared to the other forces, this general was very rich. He can only be regarded as very rich, but compared to Yang Qindong's wealth, he can't be compared to him. When Junko said that Bugnam of Gojoseon was willing to provide 5 million silver a year to support the training and development of the ninjas, the 3 were moved. With this money, they won't be disturbed by the secular world, and it won't be long before they can restore the glory of the ninja team. This was a proposal that they couldn't refuse. Of course, if they can be bought with money, then it would be too easy to deal with. In fact, it is precisely because they are not good at scheming, and it has been proven that people with distracting thoughts will not make any progress in their ninja training, so they are more honest and grateful than the average person. Considering that they have always received the kindness of the general, the 3 didn't immediately agree, but told Junko that they want to see Bugnam of Gojoseon before making a decision. This was within Yang Qindong's expectations. No matter how much a person dreamed, they had to learn to bow to reality. When Junko came and said that the 3 special ninjas wanted to see him, he didn't hesitate to agree. From the bottom of his heart, Yang Qindong is still very optimistic about the strength of the ninjas, because even in the future the name of the ninjas is very famous, and they have become the spokesman of the military force of a certain island country. At that time all kinds of high-tech weapons were rampant, but they still have such an influence, it can be seen that their background and lethality are powerful. If they can be subdued, then needless to say they will be a big help. As for whether the people of the Japanese Empire are trustworthy, he naturally has confidence. After subduing them, they will not have a chance to rebel. This confidence comes not only from the wealth he has now, but also from his martial strength that has almost reached the level of a grandmaster. From ancient times to the present, it has been mentioned by many people, but there are not many people who have really reached this level of strength. Zhang Sanfeng, the founder of Wudong, is one person, and Yang Qindong undoubtedly has such strength. Even with the faint 5 stars in his body, he can go in and out at any time, which is to say he has reached a realm where he can disappear into thin air. This is very mysterious, and Yang Qindong doesn't know why such a thing happened. Unable to understand, he could only attribute all this to luck. Perhaps God hoped that there would be such a person who could spread the spirit of Wuxia and unify the world. Unfortunately, this person had chosen him. In the big tent, Yang Qindong saw the 3 special ninjas under the rock. Among them, Kitamura was carried in a single stretcher. The 2 crossbow wounds on his legs were far from being able to recover in a short time. Fortunately, the treatment was timely, and after careful treatment, there shouldn't be any sequelae. Accompanying Yang Qindong were Junko and Beta Persei. In the face of the 3 special ninjas, 2 of whom have recovered all their strength, Yang Qindong can still face them calmly. From this point, one can see the strong confidence in his heart. At the foot of Little Een Mountain, Yang Qindong originally had the ability to take down the 3 people in a short time. If it weren't for the fact that he didn't know whether the other party had a backup plan, he wouldn't have given the other party so many opportunities to show off. Yang Qindong was calm, and even his sitting posture was very relaxed. However, Beta Persei, who was standing beside him, was very nervous. His right hand was already on the sword, and he looked like he was ready to attack at any time. He knew very well that at such a close distance, if something happened, he was afraid that he wouldn't even have a chance to shoot. That being the case, he might as well draw his sword. Since he was following the young master and was responsible for his safety, Beta Persei was naturally very cautious. Outside the main tent, the 2 captains, Chiu Vi and Dao Xiao, each led 50 of the most elite Long Wei to guard the tent. If there was any movement in the tent, they would immediately rush in. In this way, Beta Persei's nervousness and Yang Qindong's relaxation formed a sharp contrast. This was not only felt by Suzuki and Yui Suzuki, but also Junko, who didn't know any martial arts, could feel it. But she wasn't afraid at all because Yang Qindong was by her side, and he was her king. As long as her king was there, she instinctively felt a strong sense of security. You want to see me? After a brief silence in the main tent, Yang Qindong was the first to break the silence. Yang Qindong spoke in fluent Japanese, which saved Junko the trouble of translating, and he could clearly express his attitude through his tone. Yes, we want to talk to Bugnam of Gojoseon. Suzuki took on the role of the main negotiator. Speaking of which, his language skills weren't that great, but compared to Yui Suzuki, who was even more taciturn, he was much better. Then let's talk, tell me your conditions and requests. Yang Qindong nodded lightly and said casually. But in fact he was the one who took the initiative in the conversation. Yang Qindong intentionally gave the other party a chance to speak, and even put on a serious expression. Finally, after nearly an hour, the two sides finally reached an agreement under Yang Qindong's control. This content was also proposed by Yang Qindong. According to Suzuki's idea, they could join the 5-star army and complete some assassination missions that couldn't be exposed. But at the same time they also put forward a request, which was the amount of rewards they could get for completing a mission, and how much training money Yang Qindong would give them every year. Regarding this, Yang Qindong directly shook his head and rejected. He didn't want a cooperative relationship, but a pure relationship of superior and subordinate. In other words, these ninjas could only have one master, and what they wanted to do in the future would be decided by that person, and that person was no doubt himself. Suzuki naturally wouldn't agree to this, and even Yui Suzuki, who had been silent all this time, also shook her head. But then Yang Qindong proposed a plan, and the two of them made the final concession. How about this, let's make a bet. You promise this king one thing and do it, then this king will bet that your Grand Admiral will make a move on Matsumoto Kazuma. If he doesn't, then not only will I give you 5 million silver, I will also send you safely away and we will be even. Of course, if you lose, I will still give you the 5 million silver, but from then on, you must treat me as your master and listen to my orders. How about it? Yang Qindong smiled as he gave a suggestion. When he finished, Suzuki and Yui Suzuki's eyes widened. It was just a bet, and no matter who won or lost, they would still get 5 million silver. That was 5 million silver, and once they got it, it would be enough to support their development for several years, and the ninja team would also welcome a brand new change and a huge expansion. This kind of bet, as long as one wasn't an idiot, they wouldn't refuse. Okay, we agree. Just by looking at each other, Yui Suzuki could tell that Yui Suzuki was just as tempted as he was, so he agreed on behalf of both of them. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.